Chapter 1358. Most of them snorted, but a few of them found out that the lady addressed Jiang Pingji as Lord. Realizing this, their eyebrows twitched uncontrollably. Those who were qualified to address Jiang Pingji as Lord were naturally her subjects. Women like them could only address her as Lanting Duchess. What was the background of this woman? Han Yu's wife was even more certain of her guess. Although she was freaking out, she still put on a decent smile and stepped forward to greet them. I didn't expect Count Lu to be here too. It's my fault for neglecting our distinguished guest. Han Yu's wife had sent invitations to all the other ladies. It was not that she wanted them to come, but she was being considerate. Whether they were willing to attend the tea party or not was completely different from whether they had received the invitation. It was good if they came, but it was fine if they didn't. She had sent the invitation anyway. The lady said frankly, "My wife is not my lord's subject, and this is not an official occasion. My wife can just address me as Xin Yang." As soon as she said this, the faces of the ladies were like a color palette that had been overturned. Not many people knew the name Lu Xin Yang outside of the casualty camp. The ladies wanted to build a circle of friends, so they would naturally investigate the basic information of the other ladies. They all knew that Dian Yan's wife used to be a female battalion commander, but she became a military doctor because of her injury. Even if they didn't think that women could do anything great in the army, many of their husbands were not as powerful as Lu Xinyang. If they criticized Lu Xinyang and her husband Dian Yin would make things difficult for their husbands. Thinking of this, their faces became even worse. Their status in the family was precarious, and they were under great family pressure. That was why they liked to find like-minded people at the tea party to vent their stress. If their husbands knew that they had offended someone and caused a disaster, they would probably use this as an excuse to divorce. Han Yu's wife was right to complain. These ladies were not of high birth, which meant that their maternal families were not powerful enough. If they were really divorced by their rich husbands, their maternal families would not be able to support them. Everyone was worried, but Lu Xinyang didn't feel anything. Or rather, she didn't care about the schemes of the ladies in the inner house. She was one of the first batch of female soldiers in the female battalion. When she entered the battalion, she was less than 15 years old. The female soldiers of the same batch had been sold by their families, but she had signed up for the camp on her own. It was nothing more than to escape the beatings of her vicious stepmother. Her stepmother did not like her, and had long wanted to sell her to an old widower in the mountains in exchange for a betrothal gift, so that her son could find a wife. Desperate, LV Xinyang took advantage of the night to escape and accidentally ran into the women's camp. In a battle, her right leg was unfortunately disabled, and she had to retire from the women's battalion. Her father, stepmother, and younger brother had been implicated by the Red Lotus group in their early years, and had starved to death in a world of ice and snow. She was all alone. LV Xinyang had nowhere to go after her retirement, so she gritted her teeth and transferred to the casualty camp to become an apprentice military doctor. She was a virgin, but she had to deal with the wounds and bodies of different wounded people all day long. At first, it was very embarrassing. Then, out of habit, she felt that no matter how beautiful her body was, it was still like a skin-suckling pig. From a military medical apprentice to a military doctor with exquisite skills in trauma treatment, her position in the military did not retreat, but instead advanced. In the end, Yang Si was the matchmaker for her, and she married Dian Yan. Dian Yan was a rough but adorable man. She liked him very much. Even if he was the darkest and roughest suckling pig, she would not despise him. LV Xinyang attended the tea party purely because her work in the casualty camp had come to an end, and she had 2 days off. She was idle, and happened to see the invitation handed over by the gatekeeper. So she came over to see what a noble lady's tea party looked like. Sitting in the corner and silently eating melons, she was disappointed to find that these noble ladies were no different from the village women she had seen before. Even if they were dressed beautifully, to put it bluntly, they were still a group of women who were worried about losing their husbands' hearts with age. Losing one's husband was like the collapse of heaven and earth. Happiness, anger, sorrow, and joy were all tied to one person. In addition, She did not know that there were so many people who spoiled their concubines and neglected their wives. They could share hardships but not happiness. Once they became rich, they abandoned their wives and children. Could such a man really be impartial when he entered the officialdom? One should know that the legitimate wife and legitimate children represented the orthodoxy. If they did not even follow the orthodoxy of their own family, what else could they be expected to follow? This was also one of the reasons why LV Xinyang was angry. If this kind of practice was not properly rectified, it would become the norm in the future and spread from the top to the bottom. What if the common people followed suit? Now that the Lord was a woman, these people committed crimes against the wind and abandoned their wives. Were they not afraid of being despised by the Lord? Their character was not good, and their brains were stupid. LV Xinyang found an excuse to leave midway. When she left, she was generous and did not hide the disability of her right foot, but no one dared to laugh at her. Dianyan returned home very late. As soon as he came back, he found his wife frowning and thought that she had been wronged. After a detailed inquiry, he found out the whole story. These people are firecrackers and deliberately want to die without a complete corpse, right? Apart from a few who already had concubines when they went to the Lord, which important official brazenly took a concubine? Even Qiguan Rang and the others had not done it. How dare they do it? Before the world was settled, they spoiled their concubines and neglected their wives. When the world was settled, would they want to take their concubines as wives? LV Xinyang said, "This kind of evil practice must not be encouraged. In the long run, I'm afraid it will affect official business." Although for many noble women, concubines were only the wife's mobile byt to reduce the pressure of childbirth, and to serve their husbands, for the byt to become the master, and for the husband to take his concubine as his wife. This kind of behavior was against the norm. At the same time, it would also mess up the atmosphere and cause a bad influence on society. Women always liked to resent the fish that was stolen, not the cat that stole the fish. If this matter was put in front of the Lord, the cat that stole the fish would probably have a layer of skin peeled off alive. Dianyan said, "I'll look for military advisor Yang to discuss, and let him write a memorial on my behalf." The two families did not live far from each other, so it was easy to visit. But there was a movement in the bedroom that made people blush. Listening carefully, it seemed to be the breathing of a man and a woman intertwining. Hearing the housekeeper's report from outside, the movement gradually subsided, followed by a rustling sound of clothes rubbing against each other. "Why is Dianyan, that stupid person, here at this time?" Yang Si lowered his voice, full of annoyance. A slightly hoarse female voice came from the bed. The woman said, "Maybe it's business." She yawned, got up, picked up the scattered clothes on the side of the bed and put them on. "Go to sleep, I'll come back after I'm done." "No, I still have things to do in the military camp tomorrow." It was still a cold voice, but with a hint of hoarseness, which was especially irritating to listen to. Yang Si said angrily, "If that stupid Dianyan doesn't give me an explanation, I'll definitely go to his house and make a scene." Bad people should be struck by lightning when they do something good. He met an unusual woman. Although the two of them were very harmonious in bed, she refused to agree to marry him. He wanted to take advantage of the good atmosphere, to coax her into agreeing to the marriage, but he did not expect Dianyan to jump out and ruin his plans. After Jiang Nongqin heard this, the corners of her lips curled up slightly, and her eyes softened. "I'm leaving." She did not look back. Yang Si was speechless. Chapter 1359. Yang Si was in a bad mood, very bad. Even Dianyan, who was not good at reading people's words and body language, could see that even though the candles in the room were not very bright, Yang Si looked rather relaxed and lazy, apart from being in a bad mood. Dianyan coughed softly and carefully organized his words, clearly stating his purpose of coming. The more Yang Si listened, the gloomier his face became, as if dark clouds were gathering and a storm could come at any time. Dianyan asked anxiously, "What do you think of this matter, military counselor? What else can we do? Of course we'll send people to drag them out. Are we waiting for the Lord to ask about this matter?" Yang Si gritted his teeth and said, "Spoiling the concubine and destroying the wife, disregarding etiquette and law. Do they really think that this is a family matter that outsiders can't interfere with? It's the New Year's banquet in a few days. If we let these people attend, the Lord will be even more unhappy when she thinks of this matter in the future. It's better to deal with it as soon as possible. If the Lord was unhappy, the officials would not even think about having a good new year. Yang Si had a deep understanding of this point. Dian Yin nodded. There were not as many affairs for military officials as for civil officials. But if the Lord sincerely wanted to torment someone, who cared if they were civil or military officials? This kind of unhealthy practice cannot be encouraged. Dian Yin and his wife, Lv Xinyang, had the same idea. As the saying went, cultivate one's moral character, govern the country, and bring peace to the world. If one's character was not upright, and the family's conduct was crooked, it would be difficult for such a person to be a good person in the officialdom. Yang Si said, send someone to find out who they are. First, catch the most violent ones. Then write this matter into a memorial, and present it to the Lord. The New Year's Eve banquet was in 2 days. Yang Si did not want to see these people at the banquet and spoil his appetite. It was not difficult to investigate these matters. Those madams often communicated at tea parties. So the governance of the family house was naturally not very strict. After spending a day, Yang Si got the first list of names. He looked at it and smiled coldly. If I don't teach you a good lesson, the name Yang Si will be written upside down. In terms of narrow-mindedness and holding grudges, Yang Si could be ranked in the top 3 under Jiang Pingji's command. Last night, Dian Yin ruined his plans. Yang Si could settle the score later. But these people who spoiled the concubine and destroyed the wife had to be skinned. Come, prepare the carriage and horses. When Yang Si arrived, Jiang Pingji was checking the accounts with Su Ku. Fighting a war was a very costly activity. Even if they won a war, they would not be able to recover much. She still had to reward the generals who had rendered meritorious service, and reward the soldiers of the 3 armies. If it wasn't for the prosperous industries in the rear, this year's finances would probably be in the red. Even so, she still had to live frugally next year. Xiaoyu, make a budget for next year's expenditure, and give me as soon as possible. If there isn't enough silver in the public treasury, I'll get some from the private treasury. Too much fertile land in Hu County has been burned down. I'm afraid it will affect the price of grain. Send someone to keep a close eye on it. She said a lot of things, and Su Ku listened carefully. If he couldn't remember, he would make a mark with his pen. After talking for an hour, Jiang Pingji felt thirsty. She drank a cup of warm water to moisten her throat. At this moment, she heard Yang Si coming. Jiang Shi at Yin at Yang came. Yang He, Yang. From Si, Yang comma from Jing, Yang. From. He really didn't know what they were after. Yang Si handed over a booklet with a solemn expression. Jiang Pingji thought that something big had happened. She took the booklet and read it with a solemn expression. What's wrong with these people? Jiang Pingji raised her eyebrows, and a look of disgust appeared in her eyes. Spoiling the concubine and neglecting the wife? Disregarding etiquette, spoiling his concubine and neglecting his wife, this is the first, Yang Si said. Overstepping the bounds and committing treason, this is the second. Su Ku, who was at the side, could not help but tremble his fingers when he heard this. He deeply wondered which unlucky person had offended Yang Si so badly. Did they not know that Yang Si had the ability to suppress Feng Zhen and Qiguan Rang, and that he was the most petty and vengeful among the officials under the Lord's command? Offending Qiguan Rang and Feng Zhen was nothing to be afraid of. He might lose his future, but he would still have his life. It would be terrible to offend Yang Si. This guy could torture people to death. The severity of his attacks depended on the degree of offending him. Disregarding etiquette, spoiling his concubine and neglecting his wife, overstepping his bounds, treason and heresy. The former could still be mitigated, depending on the severity of the punishment, but the latter was different. In serious cases, it could even implicate the entire family. Jiang Pingji also saw Yang Si's solemnity and asked curiously, the practice of spoiling his concubine and neglecting his wife cannot be condoned. But what about overstepping his bounds? Yangtze said. The custom of spoiling his concubine and neglecting his wife cannot be condoned. But what about overstepping his bounds? Yangtze said. Which one has made great contributions? How can they receive such a special honor? According to the old system, one could not take in concubines just because they wanted to. It also depended on whether the man was capable and how capable he was. If one dared to take in so many concubines without reaching that status, this was overstepping his bounds and flouting the law. A light punishment would be demotion and losing his official position. A heavy punishment would be the extermination of his family. Yangtze said again. Please take a look, my lord. The few people at the top have 7 or 8 concubines in their backyards. Only 3 of these women have passed the official rank. The others are still treated as servants, but the servants and maids in the residence treat them as concubines. It can be seen that the master of the residence has tacitly allowed it. Jiang Pingji's gaze slid down again. There were only 4 people on the list at the top, but there were more than 20 at the bottom. Although these people are not as arrogant as the former, they also have 1 wife, 3 concubines, or 4 concubines in the residence. Yangtze noticed her movements and took the initiative to explain. According to ancient etiquette, a minister has 1 wife and 1 concubine, and a commoner has 1 husband and 1 wife. These people come from humble backgrounds or have low family backgrounds. Their achievements in the officialdom are not obvious, and they can be considered to have made no contributions. They are already arrogant before they have made a name for themselves, brazenly taking in 3 or 4 concubines. Their status was not high enough, but they still dared to take in so many concubines. Who gave them the courage? Didn't they know what kind of person they were? Yangtze was a smart person. If he wanted to kill someone, he would certainly not use simple and crude reasons. For many men, taking in wives and concubines was a wonderful thing in life. Even if they reprimanded them righteously and sternly on the surface, they would still secretly envy them. If Yangtze were to start from this point, there was a high chance that he would not be able to kill them. Instead, he would be hated by them and make an enemy out of nothing. Therefore, he liked to raise the banner of justice and orthodoxy high up in order to kill people, making them suffer and unable to fight back. Jiang Pingji nodded and said, You're right, but I see that there is a person who has made a special mark on it. What's so special about him? Yangtze said in disgust, This person is the most abominable. He connived at his pregnant concubine to move into the main courtyard. He addressed her as madam, and took his concubine as his wife. This person's husband is heartless, and his father is heartless. His mother did not think about educating her children and grandchildren, and straightening out the family style. Instead, she helped the wicked do evil. According to my investigation, his daughter-in-law did not commit any of the 7 sins. She was filial to her parents-in-law, and raised her children. In order to force her daughter-in-law to abdicate, and give up her position to a better man, his mother actually slapped her daughter-in-law for 15 minutes in front of the entire residence. She punished her to kneel on a bluestone slab in the rain for a day and a night. Such humiliation is simply unheard of. Yangtze's words were powerful and resonant. Even Suko was affected. Although everyone knew that Yangtze was not a nosy person, they still had to give him a call. Chapter 1360. Needless to say, the livestream viewers were cheering for Yangtze so much that they owed him money. Her Highness Xiaoli, are you in a hurry? Xiao Rong looks especially manly today. Even his beard can't hide his charm. Li Jiamaku, yes, a thief. His aura was also strong, second only to his lord's height of 2.8 meters. Hanyan Ningming, I'm going to climb the wall. I used to like Rong Air, but I've fallen in love with her today. They said that today's scene was the most manly Yangtze had appeared on stage in many years. At the same time, there were many in the audience who didn't think so. As far as they knew, there were many men in ancient times who had wives and concubines. What kind of restrictions were there? Those in power were all men. Of course, men would protect men. It was impossible for them to make such rules. When Yuji, I remember there's a saying that goes, farmers who collect 3 to 5 buckets of grain still want to have concubines. Concubines weren't so strict in ancient times, right? Tutifaccio. The mortality rate in ancient times was so high, and the survival rate of female babies was much lower than that of male babies. How could it be that easy to take a concubine? The concubinage system had always been the privilege of a small number of people with high positions of power. Ordinary people only had the right to do so in the Yuan dynasty. However, it was not without restrictions. Only those who were over 40 years old and had no children could have a concubinage. If this condition was not met, the person who had a concubinage without permission would be whipped 40 times. In ancient times, the ratio of men to women was not balanced. Sometimes, women were even allowed to share wives or pawn wives, completely commercializing and turning women into resources. Under such circumstances, who would dare to allow a commoner to take a concubine without any restrictions? Female resources would be crazily collected by those with high positions of power, and the number of bachelors who were unable to find a wife would increase exponentially. In this way, all kinds of violence and crimes against women would rise steadily, which was not conducive to the stability of the feudal state. It was necessary to set a threshold for concubines. Although there was no guarantee that no one would commit a crime by doing so, the number of people taking concubines was indeed not as exaggerated as imagined. Yang Si held the banner of etiquette in his hands, so he was naturally fearless. Those who were attacked by him would be in a miserable state. No matter how strong a person was, could he be stronger than 1,000 years of accumulated etiquette? Jiang Pingji frowned deeply and asked Yang Si, "Are the people you wrote real?" "It's absolutely true. It's just that," Yang Si said. "For the sake of safety, please send someone to investigate and verify its authenticity." Jiang Pingji sneered. With a flick of her wrist, she slammed the booklet onto the heavy copper table. Yang Si and Suka heard a painful sound. When Jiang Pingji released her grip, there was a handprint that was half a knuckle deep on the table. How dare they? The world had yet to be settled, yet he dared to ignore etiquette and be so rampant. Who can guarantee that the girls around them are all brought in through the proper channels? Jiang Pingji was obviously really angry. Yang Si grinned and watched the show, waiting for those idiots to be unlucky. Unexpectedly the Lord said, "Jing Rong, I'll leave this matter to you. Any madman who spoils his concubine, but neglects his wife or oversteps his authority, will be suspended and investigated." Yang Si, "Huh? No, it was almost the new year. Why would he be assigned an additional task at this time?" Yang Si couldn't hold back his urge to complain in his heart, but he put on a serious face and said, "Suspending him from duty for investigation at this time is too. I've lost a few scoundrels who don't know the rules of etiquette. Can't I maintain my composure? Won't I be a joke to the world if I'm held back by them?" Jiang Pingji sneered and said, "If you say that they will be suspended from duty for investigation, then they will be suspended from duty for investigation. Take back all the invitations to the New Year's banquet this year. Let them stay at home and reflect on what they've done wrong. Many ambitious people want to enter officialdom, but don't have a chance. They don't care. Pack up and get lost." The first few sentences were still decent, but the latter words directly exposed his true nature. It was the standard style of a bandit. Yang Si was happy and depressed at the same time. He was happy because his lord was a real man. She didn't hesitate to suspend more than 30 middle-level people in one go. He was depressed because his lord exploited people. She was already busy at the end of the year. With more than 30 people gone, the pressure on the others would be heavier. He complained endlessly in his heart, but he still had to solemnly accept the order on the surface. Jiang Pingji suddenly said, "By the way, you just said that the man's father was heartless. What's going on?" Yang Si said, "It's said that the eldest son encountered a quack when he was young. A serious illness caused him to lose the ability to carry on the family line. This person was particularly disgusted with his eldest son. He often beat and scolded him to vent his anger. According to the old servant, he even slapped the child so hard that he lost his hearing in his right ear." The audience exploded when they heard this. Salami Gigi. Damn, this man is really a scumbag. Spoiling his concubine and destroying his wife, supporting a mistress, letting the mistress live in the wife's house, domestic violence against the wife, beating the son deaf, the mother-in-law beating the daughter-in-law, spoiling the mistress. Even the scriptwriters of modern dramas wouldn't dare to write such a story. Damiazang. In ancient times, concubines were legal. I agree with everything else, but the mistress is too much. Bai Xianggao. Ha ha ha. Didn't you hear what Ronger said just now? That man doesn't have the right to have a concubine, right? If he doesn't have the right to have a concubine, then this concubine isn't legitimate. If she isn't a mistress, then what is she? A scumbag man and a scumbag woman. The legal wife and son are really unlucky. Qifeng Liao. And the evil mother-in-law. Tudafetio. Hold your breath. Based on my 10 years of experience following updates, I have a feeling that the streamer is about to make a big move. Jiang Pingji lifted her eyelids and said coldly, how can such a beast father be a father? Personally, beating the ears of one's son was a beast. Nowadays, there was a saying that a filial son is born under the rod. But no one dared to beat someone to death or cripple them, except for those who were extreme and ignorant. Of course, if the feudal society developed for another few hundred years, perhaps parents would be innocent of beating their children to death. Yang Si lamented, what a pair of poor children. Dongqing has experienced several wars. Millions of people and soldiers have lost their lives. Jiang Pingji glanced at Yang Si and Su Ku and said calmly, at this time, we should encourage childbirth and restore the population as soon as possible. In other words, children are the future of the entire country. They should be treated well. How can they be defiled by these beasts? Jingrong, call Wenbin over. I have something to discuss with him. Although Jiang Pingji did not finish speaking, Yang Si felt that his lord was about to make a big move. Yes, Yang Si and Su Ke vaguely guessed something, but the audience in the streaming room understood immediately. The streamer wanted to deprive the father and mother of their guardianship, although there was no such thing as guardianship in ancient times. Guikai Guofengxiu. Streamer, you're courting death. Jiang Pingji's eyes were calm. Even though the streaming room was in an uproar, she was still calm and collected. Streamer V. It's not as difficult as you think. To parents, besides continuing the bloodline, carrying on the family line, and raising them for old age, children are also the parents' tacit private property. Since it's private property, naturally there are ways to make them spit it out. In this era, the emperor had great power, especially the founding emperor. Jiang Pingji was tacitly the future emperor, so she had the right to be willful. In addition, she did not intend to succeed in one go. Naturally, she had to test the bottom line of everyone repeatedly. I have to let them know who has the final say in this land. Jiang Pingji smiled and poured the water in the cup out. Not a single drop was left. She sprinkled it into the trash can in the corner of the courtyard. Chapter 1361. What was Han Yu doing at the moment? He was checking the homework of his eldest son, Han Run, and his concubine's daughter. The two sons were calm, but the concubine's face was pale. Han Yu wasn't a strict father, but he wasn't a compassionate one either. He was a very normal patriarch of a feudal family. He had a lot of communication with his sons. His daughter was raised in the boudoir. They rarely saw each other except during festivals, not to mention checking his daughter's homework. His eldest son Han Run had talent and was willing to work hard. Even the picky Han Yu was very satisfied. But the concubine's son and daughter were different. The concubine's son was mediocre and playful, and the concubine's daughter couldn't even speak fluently. The concubine's daughter saw that her father was frowning. She was so scared that tears came out of her eyes and her body was trembling. She was weak, pitiful and helpless. Han Run said, "Father, she is a little nervous. Don't scare her." Han Run didn't communicate much with his siblings, and the three of them didn't have a deep sibling relationship. It was just that the environment of the academy was relatively closed and simple. It was isolated from the disputes of the outside world, and the estrangement between the official and the concubine was also weakened. Han Run saw that his sister was so timid and nervous in front of their father. He felt a trace of sympathy, and took the initiative to put in a good word for her. Han Yu's expression softened a little when he heard that. He said to his daughter, Let's call it a day. We'll check tomorrow. Go back and get ready. The concubine's daughter nodded helplessly. It's unreasonable to let girls study in the academy. Father is so strict with my sister. He had taught her for years, but he still couldn't satisfy his father with those questions, not to mention his sister who had only studied for a year. The three left the main hall. The concubine's brother was a few steps behind Han Run, and the concubine's daughter was behind them. Han Run said calmly, "Half of the students in the academy are girls. Tell them that." The concubine's brother's face turned red. He dared to say it. If he dared to say it, others would dare to beat him to death. "I don't dare to say it," the concubine's brother complained. "Are the girls in the academy still girls?" In his opinion, girls should be as docile as the maids in the mansion and speak softly. Who would have thought? Han Run frowned. "You were in the wrong first." Fortunately, father was busy and didn't ask about it. Otherwise, the concubine-born brother hurriedly begged for mercy. "Little brother's good brother, please don't say any more. The walls might have ears." Han Run sighed. The matter he was referring to was the incident of his brother out of wedlock. He didn't know the severity of the situation and had verbally harassed a girl. As a result, the other party had grabbed him by the collar and held him down in the corridor for a beating. This had attracted the attention of many students. If it weren't for the girl's sense of propriety, her brother's hand would have been twisted and fractured. This matter was brought to the attention of the headmaster, and his brother was reprimanded by a few headmasters. His words were frivolous towards his classmate, completely lacking the demeanor of a gentleman. Not only did the headmaster not support his brother, but he punished him to clean the classroom after school for a month. "Are you scared now?" Han Run asked. "Didn't your classmates warn you not to mess with the girls?" All the senior male students in the Golden Scale Academy knew that none of the girls in the female class could be provoked. They looked normal on the outside, but they were terrifyingly strong. The upperclassmen girls could easily subdue several adult men. The lethality of this attack was truly terrifying. Not only the other girls, but Han Run also noticed that his sister, who had been studying in the academy for a year, was also extraordinarily strong. He didn't know that this was due to the body refining technique that the girls in the female class had learned. The body refining technique that the female class of the Golden Scale Academy had learned came from the female camp, and the body refining technique of the female camp was a summary of the scientists in Jiang Pingji's world. It was a training method specifically for the physical fitness of women. This method could stimulate the potential of the female body to a great extent and temper the muscles and bones of the whole body. Even if it couldn't reach Jiang Pingji's level, the overall combat power would still be good. Strengthening the body and combat power were secondary. The key was that it could optimize the female body to a great extent. For example, menstruation would not hurt, and the pain and risk of childbirth would also plummet. These 2 points were the real benefits for women in this era. These were the short-term benefits. The long-term benefit was that the body refining technique could accelerate the positive evolution of genes. The first or second generation did not have any effect, but after 10 or 20 generations, the effect was obvious. Han Run still didn't know that his seemingly weak and quiet daughter had been unknowingly led astray by others. "Master, there is a carriage from the governor's manor outside. Is it a summon from the Lord?" Han Yu couldn't help but be nervous. "I don't know what it is. Hurry up and get ready." He didn't even warm the chair when he came back. He hurriedly put on a thick coat to keep him warm. It was covered with silver outside, and snowflakes were floating in the air. "May I know why the Lord summoned me so urgently?" Jiang Pingji said. "I need Jing Rong to tell you about it." "Jing Rong? What trouble did Yang Si cause him this time?" Han Yu looked at Yang Si and found that Yang Si was looking at him with a look that said, "Don't blame me. I have no choice." Han Yu fell into a suspicious silence. Yang Si must be up to something. As expected, Han Yu really wanted to rush forward and strangle Yang Si to death after knowing the whole story. No matter what kind of grudge you have, can't you wait until after the new year to take revenge? Favoring a concubine and neglecting a wife would only affect your character and career. Overstepping his bounds, was he trying to kill the 3 human races? Jiang Pingji didn't seem to see Han Yu's angry eyes. She said to him seriously, Wenbin, what do you think we should do about this? Han Yu said, dismiss them from office, of course. No matter how the crime came about, those cannon fodder could only admit it. Jiang Pingji was very dissatisfied. Why did these people dare to overstep the bounds? Isn't it because the law has collapsed and no one can restrain them? With that, Han Yu understood that the Lord wanted to revise this part of the law. No wonder she asked him to come here. Unfortunately, Han Yu was only half right. Jiang Pingji said again. Jing Rong also told me about the family in Chang'an Alley. Wenbin, don't you think the father is guilty? Han Yu was about to speak, but he suddenly thought of something. He hesitated and swallowed his words, showing a thoughtful expression. If the Lord only wanted to revise the law, she could have just sent someone to pass the message. There was no need to send a carriage to pick him up. Unless, the Lord's real purpose was not this, but something more difficult and urgent. Han Yu asked tentatively, My lord, do you mean to convict this person and punish him for several crimes? It was a bit tricky to convict a father for deafening his son. After all, there was no such law at present. Jiang Pingji asked in reply, Why? You don't think he should be convicted? Han Yu said honestly, It's hard to make a conclusion. It's not easy to convict him. If the father hurt his son and put him in jail, the innocent child would also be accused of being unfilial. Although this logic seemed to have been eaten by dogs, it was common practice. Chapter 1362. I don't agree with it either, but, Han Yu said helplessly, he is the biological father after all. According to the current filial piety, there would be no child without a father. Not to mention deafening the child's ears. Even if the father took the child's life back, he would at most be punished by the authorities. And this was a relatively older child. If the infant was still in swaddling clothes, he would be innocent even if he was strangled to death by his parents. Han Yu was a smart man. He could vaguely guess his lord's intention. He didn't oppose it, but he was worried that his lord would be opposed by the whole world. There are two kinds of kindness that parents owe to their children. One is to give birth to them, and the other is to raise them. If the kindness of giving birth is weighed, the mother owes him 10 months of pregnancy, but the father owes him only 1 night of pleasure. Doesn't he know which one is more important? It would be fine if he treated the child well, but he beat, scolded, and humiliated him. Although he is the son of the first wife, his life is worse than that of a servant. The child lost the ability to carry on the family line because of illness. In the final analysis, it is the father's fault. Now he has the cheek to despise the child. What wrong did the child do? Doesn't he have a conscience? Jiang Pingji's words were almost a challenge to the whole society's filial piety. If it were any other audience, they would have jumped in anger. Han Yu and Yang Si were both rational people. Although they were a little embarrassed, they had to admit that what their lord said made sense. After all, she was their lord. What do you mean, my lord? This child was born in a good family. His father was also a well-educated man. But he ended up like this. Jiang Pingji said, If this is the case for him, will the other children be in a worse situation? The father made his son deaf. Will the parents who are worse off break the children's hands and feet, or beat them to death? Will they ignore the ethics of blood relations and bully, or rape the children? Han Yu and Yang Si could still listen to the first few sentences calmly, but the last sentence scared them. They didn't know what killing intent was, but they really had the illusion that the air was frozen into ice just now. Han Yu said, Parents and children are blood relatives. It is possible to injure or disable them, but ignoring the ethics of blood relations. Jiang Pingji said, Wenbin, you can ask Jingrong. Is this really not true? Yang Si's reaction was different from Han Yu's. The former was shocked and deeply disgusted. Han Yu looked at Yang Si, his eyes full of hope and desire for confirmation. He was a man in the right, and his education had been positive. Even after experiencing the flames of war, this essence did not change much. It was just like how a person who lived under the sun would not know what was hidden in the darkness. Yang Si looked back at Han Yu and nodded after a while. Although it is appalling, this kind of thing is not uncommon. In ancient times, transportation and communication were very backward. The furthest many people traveled in their lives was to marry into neighboring villages and work in neighboring towns to earn money. Their living environment was relatively closed, and the ethics and morals in their minds might not be able to restrain them. Being simple did not mean that they were not stupid. Bullying one's own children wasn't a lot, but it wasn't a small number either. If he could kill his own child, wouldn't it be even more dangerous for the other children in the village? Not to mention this era. Even in the era of the live stream viewers, there were many cases of men in isolated villages impregnating left-behind children or taking the opportunity to violate them. Even old men in their 70s or 80s would do such a thing, let alone an adult man full of vigor and vitality. Jiang Pingji's behavior was acknowledged by all the salted fish. They couldn't wait to shout their support in her ear. Guikai guo fengxiao. Sigh. Although I know that the streamer is courting death, I still hope that she can succeed. Qian Zui Beibei. Protection of minors. The streamer must resist the pressure. Mwani. That? If I say the opposite, will you guys beat me to death? I think it's good that the streamer wants to protect underage children, but she must be more comprehensive. Don't turn it into a law to protect minors. Chu Jiren Zhongsan. Yes, it hurts me to talk about it. Naughty children throw babies off tall buildings. Naughty children kill babies. Naughty children carry little girls into the elevator, causing little girls to fall to their death from the 18th floor, throwing objects from high above and killing people. Zhuazhuazhua. The one above said it very well. You should pay attention to this point. Even if they are underage, they still have to be responsible for their own actions. Thinking of those naughty children on the news who escaped punishment because of their age, I really want to hack those naughty parents to death. Emolanji. In ancient times, wasn't it the father's fault for not teaching his children properly? If a child kills someone, either the child is punished or the parents are punished. Maybe it was a sore spot. All the salted fish in the live stream came back to life, who didn't have naughty children around them. They were full of resentment. Even if they couldn't see naughty children being punished in this world, it was good to watch other worlds. They were worried that Jiang Pingji wouldn't take it seriously, so they hurriedly searched for all kinds of crimes committed by naughty children that killed people. The screen was full of negative emotions. In fact, what the salted fish viewers were worried about would never happen. Jiang Pingji was a person from the future. The salted fish played the role of diligent porters. On the other side, Han Yu's face turned pale when he heard Yang Xi's words. If a father could beat his deaf son by saying that he was grateful to him, then how could he get away with the crime of violating his own blood children? This kind of animal must be punished severely. The law is the bottom line of morality, Jiang Pingji said. Wenbin, you have to know that every word you write now and in the future needs a lot of examples to prove its rationality, whether it's revising the laws of the predecessors or making laws that have never been written before. Just because you don't know things doesn't mean they don't exist. Just because there are no laws written before doesn't mean that this kind of animal is not guilty. I called you here today because I want to entrust this important task to you. I have nothing else to say. You just need to remember one thing. Go ahead and do it. No one will dare to stop you. She would kill anyone who dared to stop her. Han Yu bowed solemnly. Yes, Wenbin. If Wei Ci were here, he would find that Han Yu was more and more like the Han Yu in his memory. It was the 12th month of the year. For 11 months, Han Yu was out and about, collecting countless case materials and evidence, and revising the draft repeatedly. Yang Xi watched from the side. He had a vague premonition. His lord didn't do this on a whim. She must have planned it for a long time. His revenge against those people became a sharp blade in his lord's hand, and an excuse to take advantage of the opportunity to make trouble. As he was thinking, his lord looked at him. Jing Rong. Yang Xi quickly got up from the table and bowed solemnly. My lord, please give me your orders. Jiang Pingji said. You help Wenbin with this matter first. If you do well, I won't hold you accountable. Yang Xi used her to take revenge, and she used Yang Xi to take advantage of the opportunity to make trouble. This was called reciprocity. Yang Xi's face was bitter. He swallowed the acid that welled up in his throat and said bitterly, Yes. Jiang Pingji said. If you do well, I will allow you to prepare a betrothal gift and propose marriage. Hanyu was dumbfounded. What the hell? My lord and Yangtze they. Chapter 1363. Yangtze was happy, but Hanyu had a lot on his mind. Wenbin, no matter how much you hate C, you don't have to look like you are grieving. What bad luck. Yangtze's good mood was ruined by Hanyu's cold stare, but he was too guilty to confront Hanyu. Wasn't it because of Yangtze that Hanyu had been given so much work? Staring straight at Yangtze, Hanyu's eyebrows were knitted together so tightly that they could squash a fly. Just now the Lord said that you are allowed to prepare betrothal gifts and propose marriage. His ink-black eyes were filled with dissatisfaction, and there was even a hint of disgust, which made Yangtze's heart burn. So what? Yangtze asked gloomily. You are allowed to have a son and a daughter, but you are not allowed to find a girl? Hanyu sneered. Virtue does not match the position. What the hell? What does it have to do with virtue does not match the position? Yangtze was still immersed in the shock, but Hanyu had already turned around and left. Yangtze was so angry that he ran a few steps to catch up. They were good friends who loved each other and fought each other. It was fine that Hanyu didn't give his blessings and gifts, but he even scolded him for virtue does not match the position. He was so angry that he flipped the table. For all, Yangtze was about to rush up and ask, but he suddenly thought of something and stopped. No. Did Han Wenbin misunderstand something? Yangtze recalled Jiang Pingji's words and instantly realized that Hanyu had misunderstood. He slapped his forehead in annoyance. He tried to catch up and said with a bitter smile, Wenbin, wait a minute. You misunderstood. Hanyu stopped and turned to look at him. What misunderstanding? It is true that I proposed marriage to the Lord, but it is not the Lord. Yangtze spread out his hands and said gloomily, the Lord has a lover, and that lover is your junior. Zixiao is a very jealous person. If this misunderstanding spreads to his ears, will C still be able to live? Hanyu was speechless. Yangtze continued. The proposal is to marry Captain Jiang, and the Lord treats her like a sister. If it is a marriage proposal, the Lord will have to be involved. Captain Jiang. Hanyu raised his eyebrows. You have a good eye. This was not a compliment. Every word was filled with mockery. Jiang Nongqin was the #1 heroine in the Lord's camp. Many people had their eyes on this fat piece of meat, but Yangtze had taken it. Hanyu felt sorry for Jiang Nongqin. Why did she choose Yangtze, the unreliable guy? Yangtze pretended not to understand. He cheekily replied with a smile. Of course I have good taste. Hanyu was annoyed. Yangtze came back to his senses and asked, why are you so indignant that C has something to do with the Lord, but you don't have any reaction if it's Zixiao? Hanyu said, let's not talk about anything else. Zixiao is a gentleman. Are you? Yangtze was speechless after hearing this. I used to be young and ignorant, but now I'm a prodigal son. A prodigal son who has turned over a new leaf is more valuable than gold. Yangtze tried to regain some ground, but Hanyu only responded with a sneer. Young and insensible? A prodigal who repents is more valuable than gold? Hee hee, how shameless. Hanyu coldly expressed his contempt. Yangtze could only cover his face in despair. Did he really have to work with Hanyu the hypocrite for a year? If so, Yangtze was not sure if he would die of exhaustion or from anger. Hanyu's mouth was too irritating. Wenbin, about the things that the Lord has assigned to you, what are your plans? Yangtze decisively chose to change the topic. He would have a heart attack if he continued to be entangled in this topic. Hanyu frowned and said awkwardly, it's not difficult to collect files, investigate privately, and make new laws. What's difficult is how to make the people accept the new laws. If the people openly attack, the Lord's reputation will inevitably be damaged. I'm also afraid that other gentry families will oppose it. Jiang Pingji's legislation to protect children had, to some extent, damaged the feudal parents' right to dispose of private property. Filial piety was prevalent. Feudal parents naturally hoped that their children could obey them unconditionally. If it was illegal to beat and scold children, those parents would be furious. They gave their children their lives, gave them food, and raised them up. Why couldn't they control everything about their children? That was what parents thought nowadays. Therefore, if they really wanted to legislate, every detail had to be taken into account. They had to clearly distinguish between educating children and maliciously beating them. Yang Si said, "I think of someone who can help us with this matter." Han Yu asked, "Who?" Yang Si said, "The Lord's lover." The two of them visited Wei Xi together. Wei Xi was busy. He was handling 2 documents with a pen in each hand. His work efficiency was like a cheat. Yang Si knocked on the table and called, "Zixiao, I have something to ask of you." Wei Xi stopped writing and looked at Yang Si. "What's the matter?" Han Yu stepped forward and said, "Jing Rong said that you can help me with the matter." Wei Xi looked serious. He put the 2 bamboo slips aside to dry and stood up to greet the two. "If there's anything, Wenbin can send someone to inform me. You don't have to come in person." Han Yu sighed and explained the cause and effect. Wei Xi's expression also became serious. "I came today to ask Zixiao if there's any way to protect the Lord's reputation." "It's not difficult." Wei Xi thought for a while and said, "The people's obedience is the mandate of heaven. It doesn't matter if the aristocrats oppose it, as long as the people agree. As long as the people agree, there won't be much resistance to the Lord's new law. This matter can be handed over to Ci." Wei Xi was the best at manipulating public opinion. Han Yu asked, "What are you going to do?" Wei Xi smiled. "The people are tired of hearing the stories of praises and romance. They'll change their taste after the new year." Yang Si shivered and asked, "Wait, are you going to let the novelists write those stories?" Wei Xi said, "Why not? Novels are 70% true and 30% false. Although there are some exaggerated parts, the overall situation is still based on reality. If you let the novelists write novels and put them on the streets and alleys, the people will be resentful and hate them. When their emotions reach the peak, Wenbin will put out the prototype of the new law. The people will only cheer and sing praises of the Lord's benevolence and love. Even if there are people who oppose it, I'm afraid that the people will tear them to pieces. It's a good thing to legislate to protect children. What are the intentions of those who oppose it? The people were all illiterate and couldn't read a word. People hated them when they were ignorant, but they warmed people's hearts when they were simple. Their emotions were the easiest to manipulate and use. Of course, the people wouldn't know whose interests the new law would hurt. They would only see the poor and innocent children being hurt. Not only would the people not oppose the new law, but they would also support the new law with a sense of justice. Yang Si and Han Yu trembled secretly. This manipulation of public opinion to play with people's hearts was really good. Han Yu frowned and said, "In this case, aren't you worried that it will have the opposite effect? The explosion of negative emotions would have a negative impact." Chapter 1364. In the blink of an eye, it was New Year's Eve. Jiang Pingji held a New Year's banquet as usual, and invited the officials to celebrate the New Year together. Huang Song attended as a special guest. Although he was no longer qualified to sit on equal footing with Jiang Pingji, his seat was second only to her. Can't sit still anymore? Huang Song did not bring his 2 legitimate sons to the New Year's banquet. Instead, he brought his daughter. When the daughter saw a few children of the same age, she immediately could not sit still. But she did not dare to leave without her father's permission. Lady Qi said awkwardly, "On such an occasion, what if something happens?" Usually, it was not a big deal to quarrel, but now it was Jiang Pingji's New Year's banquet. It would not be good if the child accidentally got into trouble. Huang Song was about to speak when Jiang Pingji said, "Is that Bogeo's daughter?" "Yes, it is. Let her come forward. Let me take a look." Jiang Pingji smiled faintly. "She's pretty and cute." Huang Song caressed his daughter's back and pushed her gently, encouraging her to find Jiang Pingji. The little girl was a little afraid of strangers. Her chubby little face looked left and right. Finally, she walked timidly toward Jiang Pingji. When she got closer, she awkwardly saluted. "I wish you a happy and healthy new year." Not only did her childish voice make Jiang Pingji feel cute, but it also made the 850,000 people in the streaming room KO'd. Happy and healthy new year. Jiang Pingji reached out and lifted her onto her lap. She asked, "Did you come with your father?" The little girl nodded. "Yes, father is over there. Jiang Pingji smiled and grabbed a brocade pouch with a red seal for the new year, and hung it on the little girl's waist. I saw that you couldn't sit still just now. Do you want to play with your brother and sister? The little girl bit her lip awkwardly, as if she was thinking about how to answer. In the end, she obeyed her heart and nodded heavily. Then go. Come back when you're hungry. Jiang Pingji smiled softly, and instructed Changsheng and a few older children to play with the little girl. Huang Song was completely relieved when he saw that. The New Year's banquet program was refreshed every year, and the dishes were more and more varied. Even an old glutton like Yang Si could not find fault with it. If someone paid attention, they would find that this year, Yang Si was finally not alone. Jiang Nongqin, who was at the side, was wearing a new set of brightly colored clothes. Even though she had a cold face, she looked gentler than usual. While eating, Yang Si noticed that Jiang Nongqin's gaze was on him. What happened? Jiang Nongqin's face was cold. She looked at a dish that had not been touched and raised her chin slightly. Seeing this, Yang Si immediately brought the dish to her side. Because they were eating separately, although there were many dishes on the table, the amount of food on each plate was not large. She had already finished her portion. You seem to be very fond of spicy food these days? Yang Si asked casually. I remember you didn't like it very much before. Jiang Nongqin said. I've liked it recently. Yang Si said. If you still like it, I'll get the maidservant to bring another plate. It's just that this thing tastes sour and spicy. If you eat too much of it, it'll affect your sense of taste. He was a particular person. After tasting food with a strong taste, he would always drink a mouthful of clear soup to disperse the taste in his mouth. Otherwise, the taste of the previous dish would overwhelm the taste of the next dish, and it would not be satisfying. Jiang Nongqin nodded. Jiang Pingji noticed their movements and clicked her tongue softly. She sent someone to send a stack of things to Yang Si. Thank you for the food, my lord. Yang Si smiled. After opening it, the smile on his face slowly froze. Red dates, peanuts, longans, and lotus seeds. The plate contained these 4 items. It was not the delicacies that Yang Si had imagined. Why did his lord send him this? Yang Si raised his head and glanced at his lord. She rolled her eyes at him. He was not a slow-witted person. He came back to his senses as soon as he thought about it. He was so excited that he almost knocked over the food table. At this New Year's banquet, some people were so happy that they wanted to go in circles, while others were anxious and fearful. Whether they were valued by the Lord or not, they would know if they received an invitation to the New Year's banquet. Those who did not receive an invitation would work harder and strive to improve in the coming year. Those who received the invitation were naturally complacent and looked forward to their official careers in the coming year. The most embarrassing thing was that they received the invitation and then had it taken back. They had lost a lot of face. They secretly inquired about it and found that there was more than one family facing such a predicament. However, what exactly did they do wrong? Why did they suddenly take back the invitation to the New Year's banquet? This was undoubtedly a sign that they had been abandoned by the Lord. All the families were not even in the mood to celebrate the new year. They looked for ways to find out the truth. There was no lively laughter in the mansion. There was only a solemn and uneasy atmosphere. In a house in Chang'an Alley. You are a widower who has ruined your husband. Why are you crying? My son's good official career is going to be washed away by your tears. The old woman in bright clothes was so angry that she raised her eyebrows. She looked at her daughter-in-law with daggers in her eyes, as if she wanted to kill her. Her daughter-in-law's left cheek was swollen. The thick makeup on her face could not hide her embarrassment and haggard appearance. Her hair was loose and yellow. She looked more than 10 years older than her actual age. After being yelled at by the old woman, her eyes, which were swollen from crying, stopped crying in fear. However, she felt even more wronged and sad. The old woman said, I said that your horoscope will ruin your husband and son. It is not good for my son's official career. Look, isn't it true? It will ruin my grandson's deafness and ruin my son's official career. Tomorrow, you will leave the court. If you continue like this, won't my son be ruined by you? You are a jinx. The old woman's expression was fierce, and a trace of murderous intent flashed in her eyes. If this daughter-in-law was still not tactful, then she could not be blamed for being cruel. As a mother, she could not allow a widower who had ruined her husband and son to continue occupying the position of her son's official wife. After the old woman finished speaking, a delicate woman with a protruding belly patted the back of the old woman's hand and comforted her softly. The woman was the old woman's niece, and she was also the old woman's favorite daughter-in-law candidate. Her appearance was good for her husband and son, and her horoscope was also excellent. Ever since her son had accepted her, his official career had been smooth. Her niece's belly also worked hard, and she soon became pregnant. Seeing this, the old woman was even more eager to force her daughter-in-law to abdicate and make room for her niece. The chaotic night passed quickly. On the morning of the first day of the new year, a piece of news blew up the peaceful Wanzhou. The old woman was so scared that her face turned pale, and she knelt on the ground with a thud. Even though she was a woman, she knew how big a label it was to disregard the law and overstep the rules. Not only could it crush one person to death, but it could also crush 3 clans to death. When did you make such a grave mistake that you have to exterminate your entire family? The old woman looked at her son in despair, but her son did not respond. At that moment, the unlucky daughter-in-law came over to help her up, and the old woman's anger suddenly found an outlet to vent. She raised her fan-like palm and slapped her daughter-in-law with all her strength. She cried and scolded, "You're a widower who has ruined her husband. Where did this demon come from? We have no enmity, so why did you stay in our house and harm people?" If it was any other time, her son would have pretended not to see it. He did not like his wife either. She was old, ugly, and didn't know how to flatter others. But now, he was so annoyed that he raised his hand to stop his mother's violence. He said awkwardly, "Disregard the law because you spoil your concubine and destroy your wife. Overstep the rules because you have a concubine." Although her family was considered wealthy, they did not have the right to have 5, 6, or 7 or 8 concubines. The old woman used to despise her daughter-in-law and was afraid that she would hold on to her son's heart. So, she bought a few decent-looking concubines and sent them to her son's room to serve him. In the end, she had really shot herself in the foot. Chapter 1365. Jiang Pingji had always been a non-mainstream lord. If it was another lord, as long as it wasn't a big deal like the sky falling down, she would usually wait until after the new year to deal with it. But she didn't. She wanted the whole family to not even celebrate the new year happily. It was the morning of the first day of the new year. Jiang Pingji sent messengers to the houses and reprimanded them one by one. The entire Xiangyang district knew about it. Almost every family that was reprimanded had a similar scene. Men and women, young and old, cried together. This was the first melon of the new year, so the audience watched it with relish. They watched the excitement so much that they forgot to eat. My son is loyal and devoted to the Duke of Lanting, and has made great contributions. How is taking in 3 to 5 concubines disregarding etiquette and overstepping the bounds? The old woman was frightened by her son's words. She couldn't care less about slapping her daughter-in-law to vent her anger. She looked at the messenger carefully and said, "It's obviously my daughter-in-law. My belly is not up to expectations. My son is a fake man who can't carry on the family line. I have no choice but to force my son to take in concubines." The old woman took the blame for taking in concubines and poured dirty water on her daughter-in-law. She used it to quibble. The messenger secretly rolled his eyes. He had brought people to 2 houses, and it was almost the same story. Could there be something new? "Old madam, let me ask you, how old is your son this year?" The old woman said, "My son is 33 this year." The messenger said, "Old madam, let me ask you again. Has your son's ancestor been bestowed the title of king or minister?" The old woman blushed and said, "My ancestors have been farming for generations. My great-ancestors' generation only became rich. My ancestors were not so noble. No one has been bestowed the title of king or minister. They have been farming for generations and only became rich in recent generations. Isn't that just a commoner's family with some savings? Etiquette, the law says that commoners have 1 husband and 1 wife. What right does your son have to take in concubines? The messenger retorted coldly. You said your son has made great contributions. Is he now bestowed the title of king or minister? He has been bestowed the title after success, and has 8 concubines. Your son's contributions are meager, but he has more than 8 concubines. The old woman was so shocked that her eyes widened. She stammered, This. I don't know about this. Without sufficient status and contribution, he was not qualified to take a concubine. The emissary sneered again. I sent someone to investigate, and found that old madam is not strict in managing the family, and does not teach her children well. She allows your son to favor his concubine over his wife, and force his daughter-in-law, who has the ability to give birth and manage the family, to abdicate, and give up her position to a better man. You want to help your concubine get the position and marry her. Is this not true? Even if there was no need to investigate, just based on old madam's action of slapping her daughter-in-law without hesitation, it was enough to prove that something was amiss. How could the old madam dare to admit it? His head shook like a rattle. She wailed on the ground and made a scene. These things were done by the old woman who was blinded by lard. My son didn't do it willingly. The emissary's eyes were filled with indifference as he snorted. He waved his hand, intending to go to the next shop. Envoy, please wait. The old woman was still crying, but her son was not someone who only knew how to cry. He hurriedly pulled the messenger to the side, and secretly stuffed 2 money pouches under the cover of his wide sleeves. Both of his money pouches were bulging, and looked extremely heavy. The emissary waited in his mind, and had an idea. He accepted the man's bribe. The man's face lit up, and he felt that there was a chance. Envoy, please put in a good word or 2 for me in front of Lord Lanting. The man's expression was calm as he said, To tell you the truth, these women in the backyard are not concubines. They are all performers and prostitutes that I bought from outside. I keep them in the backyard to entertain my family. Overstepping one's authority was much more serious than spoiling one's concubine and killing one's wife. At the very least, it would affect one's career. If it was more serious, it might even bring disaster to one's entire family. However, if these women were not concubines but performers and prostitutes that he kept, then it would be a different story. After hearing this, the emissary felt a chill in his heart. This man was really ruthless. According to what the emissary knew, the pregnant woman who was about to give birth was his own cousin. In order to protect his career and future, he directly classified his pregnant cousin and other legitimate concubines as performers and prostitutes that he could buy and sell at will. Overstepping one's authority and taking in concubines was a great disaster. But keeping performers and prostitutes was not a big deal. Before the chaotic times, many rich and powerful families still had sex with prostitutes as a fashion. This was an elegant matter that was dissolute but not indecent. If that's the case, then it's most likely a misunderstanding. You can prove your innocence by taking out their contracts. The emissary sneered in his heart, but his face showed some concern as he pointed out to the man, It's getting late. I should also go to the next house, or else it will be difficult to report to them. The man respectfully sent the emissary off. The emissary left with a smile. Only when he left Chang and Ali did he spit in disgust. He said angrily, I've never seen such a shameless man. He wants to buy my life with such a small amount of money. After going to 4 or 5 houses in one morning, the emissary brought a box of spoils of war to report to them. Not only his group, but the other emissaries also returned with a full load. TSK, what a lucrative job. Yangtze raised his hand and twirled his beard. He looked at the boxes one by one, which were all filled with bribes. Some were filled with large amounts of gold and silver, and some were precious jewelry bracelets. Any one of them could help the people get out of poverty and become rich. The emissary smiled bitterly and cupped his hands. Military advisor Yang, don't scare us. How would we dare to touch such dirty money? This was related to their future. No one would give up a good life for a little bit of sweetness. Look at how timid you are. It's good that you know to be afraid. My lord hates corruption and bribery the most. Yangtze was in a very good mood and spoke very gently. He said, My lord has always been clear about rewards and punishments. You've made a contribution today, and went to so many houses. Naturally, there should be rewards. Keep 80% of these things and confiscate them. The remaining 20% can be divided. Take it as a red envelope, given by my lord at the beginning of spring this year. Oh my, what a pleasant surprise. Several emissaries looked happy. Even if it was only 20%, it would still be a considerable extra income. The emissary hesitated and said, Military Advisor Yang, I have one thing. I'm a little worried. Will those people really forge the contract? Some of the women who served in the backyard were official concubines, while others were servants who enjoyed the substantive treatment of concubines. Apart from the title, they were no different from concubines. Many of them were even pregnant. In general, almost all of them were from good families with clean backgrounds. If they forged the contract, they would be reduced from a good family to a lowly one. They would be a lowly family that could be bought and sold at will, and be trampled on by anyone. So what? Yang Si said coldly. The more ruthless they are, the better. It's best if they are so ruthless that they will be infamous for thousands of years. The source of art was above life. If these people did not court death, what would Wei Ci use as material to write his novel? At the same time, the family in Chang, an alley, was also in a mess. Several concubines were forced to sign their names. Even if they cried and begged, not only did they not make the man next to them soften his heart, but they were also kicked hard. The pregnant cousin also looked at the man with tears in her eyes. Cousin. The man was indifferent. The cousin stroked her round belly with one hand and looked at her aunt. Mother. Chapter 1366. Her cousin's eyes were filled with tears. Her son's career couldn't be ruined, so her clean reputation wasn't important? She would no longer be qualified to be the legal wife in this life, and the children she gave birth to would be despised for the rest of their lives. No, I won't sign it. The old woman was furious, and was about to use force when her cousin bent over, clutching her stomach. Her face was as pale as snow. The old woman looked at her, and was furious. Is she going to give birth? My beloved grandson isn't even full term yet. You useless money-losing thing. You can't even get pregnant for 10 months. The mansion was in a mess again. The old woman took advantage of the fact that the woman was unconscious during labor to force her to sign the contract. The man used his connections to enter the contract into the government office, and the next day, he brought the contract to redress his grievances. Not only this man, but the other families also took the same measures. They were so heartless that it was chilling. Yang Si gave them all the cold shoulder and sent them back, letting them reflect at home first. He didn't overstep the rules and take in concubines, but he couldn't shirk the responsibility of spoiling his concubine and neglecting his wife. Looking at the contract, Yang Si couldn't help but shake his head and sigh. It's really vicious. Jiang Nongqin, who was beside him, sneered. They all deserve to die. Yang Si looked at her nervously. Don't worry about this, lest you scare the one in your belly. Someone will take care of these scum. It was impossible to kill them, and that wasn't Jiang Pengji's original intention. Some methods were even more painful than death. After a few days, the news had just calmed down a little. Zaiki, the first writer of Wanzhou, released a new book. The professional storytellers who worked for the government got the first few chapters immediately. When the people heard the news, they rushed to tea houses, taverns, and other places, waiting for the story to begin. The storyteller said, After a year, Zaiki has published a new work. Today, I will present the first chapter to everyone. The people couldn't help but perk up their ears and listen carefully to the storyteller's story. Unlike the positive tone of the past, although the work this time maintained its previous standard, the tone was slightly gloomy and gloomy. The protagonist of the new book became a kind and intelligent girl from a good family with a clean background. They were engaged at the age of 13 and fell in love with each other. They could get married when they reached the age of 15. Who would have thought that the heavens would be unpredictable? The father of the good girl was a violent gambler, and once he was drunk, he defiled his beautiful young daughter. This was the content of the first segment. The audience thought that this was a story of a good family's struggle to grow up and benefit the people. Unexpectedly, the plot suddenly changed at the end, scaring the people. The more beautiful and kind Wei Si portrayed the virtuous girl, the more disgusting the plot of her being tainted by her drunken father was. Many people wanted to explode on the spot. For a father to force his daughter, wasn't he an animal? The storyteller also felt bitter. When he read the contents of the new draft, he almost burst into tears. Had Layman Zaiqi been divorced by her scumbag husband? Why was this new work so torturous? The storyteller went on to tell the second stanza. The beast father was afraid that the matter would be exposed, so he lied to his wife and threatened his daughter, selling his daughter to a broker. When he got home, he lied and said that his daughter was restless and greedy, so she eloped with a man in the middle of the night. In reality, the daughter of a good family was chosen by an old madam of a rich family to be her son's concubine. She thought that the bitterness was over and the sweetness was coming. But who knew that just out of the tiger's den, it was like a wolf's den. This family was also strange. There was a gloomy old madam, a beautiful but very haggard legal wife, a deaf first Langjun, and a neglected autistic first wife. She had never met the old master. She had just been bought, and was feeling uneasy in the unfamiliar environment. She accidentally saw a strange man, and the niece of the old madam. Later, she found out that the man was the old master of the residence. Following that, she witnessed the old madam scolding and slapping the legal wife. The reason for nitpicking was also groundless. Finally, the daughter of a good family heard the conversation between the two female servants. The conversation vaguely mentioned the truth of the first Longjuan's deafness. In a flash, the 3 new chapters were finished. The people listening to the story said, "What's next? What happened to Cui Nyang in the end?" The storyteller said helplessly, "The draft hasn't been released yet." The people were anxious, but so was he. They were eager to know what Cui Nyang had experienced in this family, what secrets were hidden in the residence, and whether Cui Nyang would be able to turn into a butterfly in the end. From 1 to 10, from 10 to 100. Finally, someone realized that this story was very familiar. Isn't this the family in Chong and Alley? If you didn't remind me, I wouldn't have known. Now that you've reminded me, it's really similar. Because of the stuck plot, the people were not satisfied. They went back to talk about it, and found that the plot was very similar to the family in Chong and Alley. Under Wei Si's intentional manipulation, the affairs of the family in Chong and Alley were also uncovered by the people. The people who were watching the drama had their fill. It turned out that the story of Layman Zaiqi had a prototype. It turned out that there were so many rules for rich families to take in concubines. It wasn't as they had imagined that they could take in as many as they wanted. It turned out that the rich family in Chong and Alley had such ugly manners. How much of the plot in the story had actually happened? Wei Si's novel was written very quickly. Soon the people knew the rest of the story. The daughter of a good family, Cui Nyang, witnessed the rise and fall of this family. In order to protect himself, the male protagonist forced his once loving concubine to forge a marriage contract. The once favored cousin was also forced to sign the contract during childbirth. In the end, she had a difficult birth and died after giving birth to a daughter. The old woman showed a look of disgust. She ignored the bloody baby girl and left while cursing. The originally rich family ended up in dire straits and had their house confiscated. Cui Nyang was lucky enough to escape. At the end of the story, Cui Nyang returned home in a daze. She faintly heard strange movements coming from home. She peeked and was shocked to see that the father who ruined her was shamelessly pressing on his younger brother and doing that improper thing. The story was over. Not only was the audience shocked by this ending, as a fan of Layman Zaiqi's novel, Yang Si was also shocked to the point that his worldview collapsed. What kind of provocation did this guy suffer to use this kind of method to take revenge on society? How could such a hardcore plot about taking revenge on society be written by someone as noble as Wei Si? Wei Si expressed his chuckle. The internet water army had not really exerted its power yet, okay? After Layman Zaiqi's new article, a few other famous novelists also wrote related new books. If one paid careful attention, they would find that these stories all had a common characteristic. In the stories, there were always children who were hurt by their parents, relatives, neighbors, or villagers. Not only physically but also mentally. These children were originally created to be positive and positive. At first glance, they sounded like a likable girl next door or younger brother. But each of them ended up more miserable and pitiful than the other. These novelists destroyed the beautiful characters that they had created with their own hands. The more this happened, the more depressed they became. Some people felt that it was alarmist, but more people shuddered while feeling angry and sad at the same time. Chapter 1367. For the ancient people who lacked entertainment, listening to storytellers telling stories and watching theatrical troupes performing was a rare form of entertainment. Just 1 or 2 copper coins were enough to pass the day. Some theatrical troupes and storytellers would even go to the countryside to hold activities. Every time they appeared, it would cause riots among the people in the surrounding villages. Judging by their fanaticism, they were almost as fanatical as the fans in the live stream room. Under Weissi's control, all kinds of depressing stories spread from Wanzhou to other parts of the country, earning countless sympathy and tears. The people enjoyed the show and went back contentedly. However, the more they thought about the previous plot, the more they felt that something was wrong. Second Aunt, do you know about the crazy widow in the South Village? Second Aunt said, that crazy woman? I passed by her house a few days ago. She grabbed a handful of dog dung and threw it at people. It was so disgusting. The woman's face was pale as she said, Second Aunt, you don't know. That crazy widow wasn't crazy in the past. It was because a few idle old men in the village dragged her daughter to the mountains and played her to death. They lied and said that she was bitten to death by a bear. The crazy widow saw her daughter's corpse and couldn't take the shock, so she went crazy. She threw dog dung at people. Do you know who she hit? Those bastards' grandsons. After Second Aunt heard this, she couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. She said, Isn't this the play just now? The woman gritted her teeth and nodded heavily. The new play performed by the theatrical troupe just now was adapted from a novelist's new book. The content of the new book was simple. It was about a young girl named Gu Sanyang. In order to escape being sold by her stepmother to a crippled old man, she fled the village in the middle of the night to join the army and become a female soldier. After several years of war, she followed her lord to conquer the world and finally returned to her hometown in glory. Apart from Gu Sanyang, the character who received the most attention in this new play was Gu Sanyang's best friend, Ajia. Ajia was intelligent, witty, and beautiful. Most importantly, she was brave and resourceful. Gu Sanyang's courage to escape marriage and join the army was largely due to Ajia's help. The people watching the play especially hoped that Ajia would leave the village, but Ajia was filial to her widowed mother and chose to stay in the village. A few years later, Gu Sanyang returned to her hometown in glory. The last scene was about Gu Sanyang riding a horse back to the village, imagining Ajia's current appearance. The person who played the role of Gu Sanyang was a talented girl who was good at talking and singing. She imagined that Ajia had married a good man, had a son and a daughter, and had a beautiful career and family. In short, in Gu Sanyang's eyes, a beautiful person like Ajia was qualified to be an empress. In the end, after returning to the village, Gu Sanyang met with Ajia's mother, who had gone crazy. She learned from her mother that Ajia had died 4 or 5 years ago. Just as the common people in Gu Sanyang were guessing the cause of Ajia's death, the crazy widow mother wept and told the truth. Ajia is still more than a year away from her marriageable age. She looks more and more beautiful. Several old men in the village have been coveting her for a long time. When Ajia's widowed mother went out to work, they used the excuse that the widowed mother fell in the field to lure Ajia out. They tortured her to death and left her without a complete corpse. Gu's killing to revenge for Jia's revenge, but of the story. But by scenes. By Gu of the drama. The play reminded them of the daughter of the mad widow years ago. Except for this new play, the other plays were also of the same theme. Even if it was a happy ending, the people always felt that something was stuck in their throats. They were so disgusted that they couldn't breathe. Whether it was Ajia or Wei Si's Chui Nyang and little brother, their lives were destined to be gloomy. Second aunt came back from washing clothes. When she passed by a house, she saw an old man sitting on the other side of the fence and staring at her chest. She was so angry that she spat on the old man's face. "Bah! Old man, you will get what you deserve." Without waiting for the old man to react, second aunt walked back home with heavy steps, swaying her hips. Of course, these plots were not coincidences. When Han Yu checked the related files from all over the country, Wei Si picked a few typical ones as materials. He would not interfere with what the novelists wrote, as long as the content was not illegal. But this time, the novel with a theme was released, which limited the content and theme of everyone's new book. No one had any objection to this. They were considered to be working for the government. Writing novels was not only to realize their own ideals, but also to make a living. Wei Si treated them well. It was not difficult at all for them to write some novels with a theme according to the requirements. The new books of these novelists had even been criticized by later generations as the Revenge on Society series, realistic School of Darkness novels. Wei Si's biography of Chui Nyang was the founder of this genre. Smiley face, angle, with the ferment of public opinion, the people's debate on these matters became more and more intense. Wanzhou, which had been in constant turmoil since the beginning of the year, was shrouded in a depressing atmosphere. Jiangpingji was the center of this atmosphere. Even the salted fish in the streaming room could feel it, let alone the dog who worked overtime. In order to escape punishment, they forced girls into prostitution. Why are these people reading the books of the sages? Aren't they afraid that the sages will scold them in their dreams at night? Jiang Pingji was also angered by these people's actions. She had seen shameless people, but she had never seen such shameless people. They are all king beasts. Jiang Pingji was so angry that she swore. Qiguan Rang, Wei Si, and the others looked down, as if they did not hear their lord's indecent words. What else could they do? Their lord was so angry that she slapped the custom-made copper table 7 or 8 times, each deeper than the other. It looked like it was going to be scrapped and redone. Their bodies were not as tough as that table. How could they dare to replace it? In addition, everyone looked down on those men who used unscrupulous means to curry favor. In troubled times, there were many loopholes in the management of the good and lowly families, but it was rare to see a good family being forced into a lowly one so blatantly. Feng Jin said calmly, "They are just people who become arrogant and forget themselves once they become rich. They are greedy and unquenchable. They are not worthy of my lord's anger." Although he did not care much about family status, he also had to say that there were very few people who could still keep their hearts after the poor became rich. If the problem of the gentry was that they did not want to make progress and were mediocre and inactive, then the problem of the commoners was that they were greedy and unquenchable. But for Jiang Pingji, no matter which group dominated, it was not a good thing. She had never been someone who liked to feel wronged. Those people had violated her taboo. How could she let them go? That's what I say, but I still feel a little angry. Just the things that have been shaken out are already unsightly. Who knows what is hidden in places that we can't see? If we allow these beasts to climb up, I don't know how many innocent lives will be lost. Jiang Pingji said, "I originally wanted to let them go and give them a small punishment as a warning. Now it seems that we have to punish them severely to warn the others." Chapter 1368. Some people can be communicated with words, but some animals can only be communicated with sticks. Poor Taoist Xianyu Jindu. My streamer is so kind. She even thought of letting those animals go. Nongfu Shangquan Yudiangshuan. Tisk Tsk. How thick of a fan filter do you wear? Has the streamer ever been kind? Those scumbags were forced to become prostitutes because the streamer misled them. She's fishing for justice. She should sympathize with those scumbags. Guikai Guofengxio. The crime of overstepping one's authority can be serious or minor. It all depends on whether the person in power is merciful or ruthless. The streamer might as well be ruthless and let them see blood. That way, she can make an example out of them and deter those who have evil intentions but haven't taken action yet. Tudifatio. Yes. Severe punishment is needed in troubled times. Kindness is useless at times like this. Kindness is a sharp weapon against gentlemen, but it's connivance against villains. To deal with villains, you can only fight poison with poison, and an eye for an eye. They will only listen to you when they are truly afraid of you. The audience's bullet screen was nonstop. Jiang Pingji had a plan in her mind. This matter will be handled by Wenjeng and Huayu. In order to deter those who are hiding in the dark, they must be dealt with severely. Qiguan rang, and Feng Jin stepped forward to receive the order. Jiang Pingji sent the two of them to handle this matter. It was obvious that she didn't give those scumbags a chance to make a comeback. Qiguan rang came from a humble background. He was low-key and eccentric. He rarely interacted with outsiders. It was almost impossible to rope him in. Feng Jin was the only person under Jiang Pingji who was tall, rich, and handsome. He wouldn't be merciful to scumbags with low morals. It was basically impossible to make a comeback after meeting these two people. The people of Wanzhou had watched enough of a good show these days. They loved the drama of evil retribution. They watched as the few people who spoiled their concubines to the death of their wives, overstepped their authority, and forced women to become prostitutes fall one after another. The people raised their hands in celebration. Some people even bought firecrackers to celebrate, using it to vent the grievances and depression they had suffered recently. Feng Jin and Qiguan Rang didn't go easy on them. Although those people weren't sentenced to death, they had to be flogged 80 to 50 times in public. Each family was fined 1,000 strings of coins and confiscated their illegal property. Their entire family, old and young, was exiled back to their ancestral home. 3 generations of their clans were not allowed to become officials. Apart from that, those women who were forced into lowly status had to be given a compensation of 100 strings of coins to be returned to good status. Although he was lucky enough to survive the beating, he was already half crippled. This was the plan that Qiguan Rang and Feng Jin had come up with after discussing it. It was true that killing these people would put an end to all troubles, but the deterrent effect would not be enough. It would be better for them to live a life worse than death. They could only watch as the 3 generations of the 3 clans were implicated, unable to rise up, and finally go down in infamy for 10,000 years. Combined with Wei Xi's public opinion tactics, not only did Jiang Pingji's actions not cause a backlash, but she also gained a wave of diehard fans. Those who had evil intentions, but had yet to take action secretly rejoiced. Fortunately, they were able to control their lower bodies, and did not spoil their concubines, nor did they overstep their bounds by taking in concubines. Some of the people who had secretly kept a few mistresses were also terrified. They paid a large sum of money to get rid of the mistresses, and became much more obedient. Jiang Pingji asked Han Yu and his team to redraft the marriage laws. Some viewers in the streaming room asked her to take the opportunity to abolish the concubine system. But after careful consideration, Jiang Pingji gave up on the suggestion. It was unrealistic to abolish the concubine system based on the current level of society, and it would also cause a violent backlash. Instead of abolishing it altogether, it was better to regulate the concubine system first. For example, a commoner could have 1 husband and 1 wife, and no matter how high an official's rank was, he could take a concubine after 40 years of age. This compromise would calm those who were eager to make trouble. No one knew better than Jiang Pingji that as long as society developed to a certain stage, the concubine system would not be able to keep up with the pace of the times, and would naturally be eliminated. There was no hurry to abolish it. Moreover, there were policies from above and countermeasures from below. Men could not put concubines on the table, but they had other ways. For example, keeping singers and dancers, adopting so-called adopted daughters, or the wife's dowry maids. It was said that they were temporarily staying in the residence, but in fact, they were women who warmed the bed. Of course, if a man who was not qualified to take a concubine gave birth to a concubine's child, he would inevitably be severely punished. With Jiang Pingji's help, Han Yu summarized the marriage laws into several major categories, such as marriage, divorce, protection during marriage, responsibilities and obligations of both parties in marriage. Each category had a detailed classification and description. For example, there were divorce forms such as divorce, divorce by marriage, and peaceful divorce. In order to draft the laws, Hanyu had read more than 5,000 related files. He even took his team to many places, which made Mrs. Han's face more and more gloomy. What did he mean? Was Hanyu planning to get a wife? His eldest son, Han, was also anxious. One day, he finally plucked up the courage to ask Hanyu. Hanyu was stunned at first. Then he explained, not knowing whether he should laugh or cry. Han asked, "Why did Lord Lanting entrust this matter to my father?" He thought that his father preferred to give advice on the battlefield and revise the laws, which sounded boring to him. Han also found that his father's study was almost flooded by old files. There was not even a place to stand. It was too tiring. Hanyu shook his head with a smile. "You are still young. You don't understand my choice." Compared to the battlefield, he was more suitable for this stage. Jiang Pingji gave Hanyu enough authority to choose his own people to set up a special department to revise the laws. Although there was no specific official title, judging from the salary, treatment, and responsibilities, it was almost equal to the Minister of Justice, one of the 9 ministers. Of course, Hanyu's current task was only to revise the new laws. Although the marriage laws were revised by Hanyu, it was Jiang Pingji and the 850,000 idle fish viewers who made the final decision. Because of the predecessor's information and experience, it didn't take long to revise the laws. The whole article was about 5,800 words. Jiang Pingji couldn't help but praise Hanyu to the idle fish. She said, "Wenbin is really born for this job." Classical Chinese was indeed concise, but it was easy to find loopholes in the interpretation. Hanyu chose to learn from his teachers, Master Yuanjing and Chengcheng. He boldly used the vernacular that ordinary people could understand to reduce the chance of finding loopholes. It was an innovative move. It was a good move. It was easy to disseminate and promote. The only drawback was that it wasted too much paper. There were all kinds of idle fish in the streaming room. Jiang Pingji discussed with several lawyers for a while and revised some of the unreasonable content. She asked Hanyu to take it back and rework. Of course, it didn't mean that the draft could be finalized. In the end, everyone had to read it. Only when everyone was satisfied with the draft could the matter be considered finished. For Hanyu, the revision of the new marriage laws was just a warm-up. At least the marriage laws could still follow the experience of the predecessors, and there were traces to be followed after some modifications. However, the child protection laws that the Lord had passed down to him had to start from scratch, and he had to explore and accumulate them bit by bit. The stormy 1 month finally passed. With the arrival of spring, the tense atmosphere was finally relieved. The wives of the family started to move around. Chapter 1369. After only 1 year, all the madams seemed to have changed into different people. Their faces were filled with smiles that were brighter than spring flowers. The original tea party was full of resentment, but now it had been swept away. There was not a trace of melancholy between their eyebrows, and they were more beautiful than flowers. As the host of the tea party and Hanyu's wife, there were many people who flattered Madame Han. The madams spoke more or less with gratitude. They could not express their gratitude in front of Jiang Pingji or Hanyu, so they could only thank Madame Han in a roundabout way. Little did they know that Hanyu and his wife, who were in love with each other in the eyes of outsiders, had been living in separate rooms. Madame Han's smile was slightly stiff when she heard the flattery from the madams. As the madams arrived one after another, the tea party gradually became more lively. Everyone enjoyed the tea and enjoyed the flowers. Why didn't Madame Zhang and Madame Ning come today? A madam sat down at her seat. She glanced around and found that several madams whom she could get along with were not there. Madame Do was sick for a while before the new year. "I'm afraid we don't know what happened this month," a madam said with a smile. Something happened to Madame Zhang and Madame Ning's husband. Their whole family was sent back to their hometown. They are worried about it. How could they be in the mood to come to the tea party? Madame Doe couldn't help but widen her eyes. A trace of astonishment flashed through her eyes. She had been sick on and off for almost 2 months. During that period, she had been busy with her family's affairs. Indeed, she did not pay much attention to the outside world. What happened? Why were they sent back to their hometown? Madame Doe had left the circle of madams for less than 2 months. Why did she feel that there was a generation gap between her and them? Seeing that she really didn't know, everyone kindly informed her about the big news that had happened recently. There was a lot of information about last year's New Year's Eve. The audience was very satisfied. Madame Doe, do you know that Madame Zhang and Madame Ning's husband had 6 or 7 beautiful concubines? Of course I do. After all, they were considered close friends. She also knew that the 2 of them had been hurt by their fickle husbands. She had heard them complain a lot. Madame Doe felt that it was not worth it for them, but she also had her own mess to deal with. It all started before the new year. At the tea party before the new year, the wife of the commandant, LV Xinyang, came as well. No one knew what the lady heard and what she said when she went back, but the Duke of Lanting flew into a rage. On the first day of the new year, he sent messengers to the Duke's residence to reprimand those who overstepped their boundaries and took concubines. Those men are also cruel and heartless. In order to protect their futures, they lied and said that the concubines in their mansions were not concubines, and secretly forced the good concubines to become lowly. Humph! How could their stupid tricks escape the eyes of the Duke of Lanting? When the madams talked about this matter, they immediately felt a sense of elation. Although their husbands didn't take any concubines, they secretly kept 1 or 2 mistresses or adopted daughters. Those women didn't have the status of concubines, but they were treated like concubines. It was disgusting. After this incident, her men hurriedly cleaned up the backyard, not daring to leave any traces behind. These days, she was even more well-behaved. Not to mention looking for those vixens, she didn't even go out to socialize. Madame Doe could not help but cover her mouth with her handkerchief and let out a short gasp. Seeing Madame Doe's reaction, the other madams laughed. It's important to know one's place. If one's status isn't high enough, he can't take concubines. It's clearly written in the ancestral etiquette. One of them gloated. In the past, no one pursued this matter. Any man with some money in his pocket would want to have a large number of wives and concubines. Now that the Duke of Lanting wants to restore the etiquette, can't they be caught and killed for the monkeys to see? Spoiling concubines and killing their wives, overstepping their boundaries, and forcing good women to become prostitutes. These 3 crimes are punishable together. Even an Iron Man would have to peel off a layer of skin. Now, the Duke of Lanting is only banning the 3 generations of his family from becoming officials, and sending the whole family back to their original homes. This is already an act of mercy by the Duke of Lanting. The Duke of Lanting is a woman after all. He's too soft-hearted. Another madam rolled her eyes in dissatisfaction and said in a treacherous voice, "In my opinion, those annoying vixens should be sold off and put an end to their troubles. Anyway, they've already become lowly citizens. That's what they deserve. Yet the Duke of Lanting wants them to return to their original homes. They're obviously vixens. It's fine if they aren't punished, but they're allowed to leave with the Baekwon silver and regain their freedom. These vixens have a good life." The madams nearby could not help but move further away when they heard this. The tea party was a public event. She had blatantly expressed her dissatisfaction with Jiang Pingji. Did she despise her husband for living too long? Madame Doe reluctantly sorted out the cause and effect. She was secretly speechless. She had been wondering why her husband, who hadn't come to her room for years, was resting in her room every day. Not only did he show concern for her 3 times a day, but he also played the role of a good husband in front of others. He even said he wanted to draw her eyebrows in the morning. It almost disgusted her. It turned out that her husband was so concerned about her, an old woman, because of this? A trace of disgust flashed through Madame Doe's heart. She almost vomited on the spot. She said calmly, "I see. It looks like I won't be able to visit them in the near future." If her husband's family was sent back to where they came from, she would probably not be able to see them for the rest of her life. That's not necessarily true. Maybe it'll be better in a few days. What do you mean? Madame Do was confused. Madame Zhang and Madame Ning are busy divorcing or severing ties with their husbands. Madame Do was dumbfounded by this bombshell. Was this husband and wife are birds of the same forest, but they fly separately in times of crisis? Seeing Madame Do's unhappy expression, everyone knew that she had misunderstood. They explained, "They're doing this for the sake of their children." Madame Do asked, "What do you mean? Abandoning one's husband for the sake of their children?" Madame Do could not understand this strange logic. It looks like Madame Do really doesn't care about what's going on outside these days. A young madam smiled and said, "A while ago, Duke Lanting ordered people to revise the new marriage laws. For the sake of their children's futures, Madame Zhang and Madame Ning can only choose to be independent after severing ties. Otherwise, their children will be implicated by their father. They won't be able to have an official career when they grow up, and will be commoners for 3 generations." Madame Do said, "Will this work? If Duke Lanting orders to punish the 3rd generation, he definitely won't allow them to take advantage of this loophole." One of the madams said uncertainly, "Perhaps it's possible." After all, the madam at Chang and Alley succeeded. The madam at Chang and Alley was a famous figure in the circle of madams. Of course, it wasn't a good reputation. Chapter 1370. Unexpectedly, this incompetent woman had the guts to bring the new marriage law to the magistrate, claiming that she wanted to sever ties with her husband. Severance referred to the separation of husband and wife if one party fought, insulted, murdered, or raped the other party's relatives. This form of divorce favored the rights and interests of the husband's family. For example, if the wife had the intention to murder her husband, she could sever ties with him. But if the husband had the intention to murder his wife, it did not constitute a condition for severance. After Han Yu's amendment and Jiang Pingji's adjustment, the law was given a new meaning. If one party of husband and wife beat, murdered, attempted murder, or raped the other party's relatives, it would be considered as severing ties between husband and wife. If the husband stole his wife's dowry, beat his wife, insulted and beat his relatives to the point of disability, or took a concubine as his wife, the wife could also propose severance. The lady from Chang and Lane met the conditions for severance. After the severance, she fought for custody of her 2 children with the excuse that her husband was violent and cruel, and had beaten her son until he was deaf. Although her husband's family was angry and ashamed, they thought that their children would not be implicated after the severance, so they swallowed their anger. Of course, if the new marriage law had not been announced at this time, the lady from Chang and Lane would have ended up like this. If she returned to her hometown with her husband's family, she would most likely be tortured to death, and her children would have no future. If she chose to sever ties with her husband and become independent, she would at least have a way out. When these ladies got married, most of them had a large dowry, which was enough for the 3 of them to live on for decades. After seeing her example, the wives of the criminals clamored to divorce or sever ties with their husbands. They all wanted to take advantage of this loophole. There was no hope for their husbands in this life, but there was hope for their children. He didn't know if he could succeed in taking advantage of this loophole. Madame Do heard all this and sighed. It's not easy for a woman to be independent. Someone laughed. Even if it's not easy, you have to live. No one has it easy in this world. Madame Do looked at the person and found that it was a tall and beautiful woman who looked to be in her early 20s. But she was confused by the way she dressed. She was in her early 20s, but she still had her hair in a bun. Madame Do did not know the identity of the person, so she responded with a smile. That makes sense. That person sat down on the empty seat beside Madame Do. His eyes were filled with curiosity, as if he had never been to such a tea party before. How should I address you, my lady? It turned out that the gossiping madam had gone to find another group. Madame Do was rather bored, and took the initiative to talk to the woman who was just now. Me. The man rolled his eyes and smiled. My surname is Jiang. Madame Do's eyes flashed and she asked in surprise. Could it be Captain Jiang? Madame Do's conjecture was confirmed with a smile. Little did he know that the person who impersonated Jiang Nongqin was being mocked by countless salted fish. To defeatio. Leaving your subordinates and work behind to look at a beauty? Does your conscience not hurt? Jiang Pingji smiled as she touched a handful of melon seeds and started munching on them. Hostvi, why does it hurt? Not only was it not in pain, it was also alive and kicking. Madame Doe looked around as she continued to munch. Seeing that she was behaving so rudely, the smile on Madame Doe's face disappeared, and she quietly moved further away. As expected of a woman from the military camp, she did not have the slightest bit of elegance and nobility. Jiang Pingji ignored Madame Doe's reaction and happily finished munching on a plate of melon seeds. Before coming to the tea party, she went to visit Jiang Nongqin, who was said to be suffering from morning sickness. By chance, she found out that there was a well-made invitation on her table. After asking about it, she found out that it was a tea party hosted by Madame Han. She happened to be bored, so she brought the invitation to join in the fun. 3 women in a play. With more than 30 women gathered together, it was not just 10 plays. Jiang Pingji used her extraordinary hearing and strong spirit to memorize everyone's conversation in her head. Judging by the reactions of the madams, the new marriage law that was announced was not bad. She touched the empty plate and realized that it was empty. She hurriedly called for the servant girl to add another plate. Because of the small mountain of melon seed shells on the table, the group of noble madams could not help but move away from her, leaving an empty space. The salted fish in the streaming room felt very embarrassed. The streamer was such a disgrace to salted fish. At that moment, Madame Han happened to notice the strange situation in the corner. She glanced around and suddenly froze on the spot. Among the many madams present, Madame Han was the only one who had seen Jiang Pingji up close. She dismissed the other ladies with a stiff smile and came to Jiang Pingji's side with some apprehension. May I know how I should address you? Madame Han probed. Jiang Pingji was obviously pretending to be innocent, so it was not appropriate for her to expose her identity. Madam, just call me Madame Jiang. Madame Han could not sit still. She did not know why the other party had come. Jiang Pingji chose to be honest. I'm just here to slack off. You don't have to be nervous. You don't have to call me over. She had a good memory, so of course she remembered Han Yu's wife. It couldn't be said that he hated her, but it also couldn't be said that he liked her. In her eyes, the other party was the most ordinary noble lady of a landowning household. She was a woman who had been instilled with the ideology of a clan since she was young. She could also see that Han Yu and his wife were not as respectful to each other as the rumors said. But this was the official's family business, and she could not intervene. Husband and wife matters should be left to the husband and wife to resolve. Outsiders' interference would only add to the chaos. Jiang Pingji did not intend to provoke Madame Han, but Madame Han had something to say. This concubine has something that I don't understand. I wonder if Madame Jiang can dispel my doubts? Jiang Pingji held her forehead and said, Are you also going to ask me why I am friendly to the poor and ignore the landowning households? Madame Han's face turned red, and then it gradually turned pale. Jiang Pingji said, I am not friendly to anyone or ignoring anyone. I heard that you are well-read, so you are naturally different from the ordinary ladies in the boudoir. Why can't you jump out of the fence? The way the ladies in the inner house look at things is different from the way the Lord looks at things. Although it was not meant to be sarcastic, Madame Han was still embarrassed by her words. Madame Han was born in the inner house. You only know your father, brother, husband, and children. It's good that they are doing well, and the family is happy. They are your backbone, but I am the backbone of millions of common people. Jiang Pingji said while eating melon seeds, The landowning households and the common people are all officials to me. In my eyes, the only difference between them is that they are useful and useless. Use the useful ones and discard the useless ones. She had so few landowning households. Apart from herself, most of the reasons should be attributed to the landowning households. It was fine that the landowning households refused to work for her, but now they blamed her for colluding with the poor. What a robber's logic. Having said that, let's say a few more words. I heard that you have a close relationship with your maiden family? Madame Han looked unhappy, Yes, so what? Chapter 1371. Madame Han was startled at first, but then she became angry. Jiang Pingji's metaphor undoubtedly touched Madame Han's sensitive nerve. Her graceful demeanor became a little awkward. Was it an obvious insult to her by using Huang Song and his wife as an analogy? As the Lord, how can you criticize the petty affairs of the officials like a gossipy woman? So what if she kept in touch with her maiden family? She never had any intention of being a disloyal official. Instead, it was the Lord who was narrow-minded. Madame Han couldn't tell what she was feeling at the moment. She was just embarrassed that Jiang Pengji, as an outsider, had intervened in her and Han Yu's affairs. She felt like she was being monitored, and her freedom was being restricted. She was so angry that she didn't suppress her voice. Her Lord Lanting was heard by all the ladies. The ladies who heard the commotion were dumbfounded. They stared at Jiang Pengji and Madame Han in a daze. Their gazes kept shifting. They didn't hear what Jiang Pengji said to Madame Han, but they heard what Madame Han said to Jiang Pengji. Although it was rare for a lord to intervene in the affairs of the officials, it was not unheard of. For example, Huang Song used to like to send beautiful women to his officials. However, Jiang Pengji was a female lord, and most of the officials were men. Once she intervened, it would be awkward and ambiguous. Even if the relationship was innocent, people who liked to gossip could still imagine countless love and hate relationships. An unmarried lord and a married official. TSK. Gossip, cliché, and explosive. Isn't it more attractive than a novel? Madame Han regretted her words as soon as she finished speaking. She immediately bowed and apologized with a pale face, trying to salvage the situation. I have spoken inappropriately just now. Please forgive me, Lord Lanting. Following Madame Han's action, the other ladies in the tea party all turned pale. They bowed and apologized. Madame Doe also recognized Lord Lanting as the rude woman who kept eating melon seeds. She was so scared that her face turned pale. She tried her best to lower her head. She was sweating profusely and secretly prayed that Jiang Pengji would forgive her. She didn't have the mood to think about gossip. Jiang Pengji frowned. She was about to speak when she saw the live streaming room exploding. Winnie's green hat. Host, don't talk nonsense. Based on my years of experience watching palace dramas, if you don't handle it well, there might be a scandal. You have to distance yourself from Han Yu as soon as possible. Otherwise, if those gossipy women go home and make up stories for the whole night, the news might spread tomorrow that Master Lanting was infatuated with Han Wenbin and mocked Madame Han at the tea party. Tire Abatement Brigade Leader. Wenbin Beauty's wife. She looks like a dignified and beautiful lady. She looks good and has a good temperament. But she didn't seem to be as likable as she had expected. Maybe it was because the way she looked at others was annoying. Jiang Pengji casually glanced at the bullet screen and moved her gaze away naturally. She said to Madame Han, "What you said makes sense. This is a family matter between you and Wenbin. Outsiders have no right to interfere. But don't forget, Wenbin is also a subject that I rely on. If he is distracted by family matters and is unable to serve me wholeheartedly and work for the welfare of the people, it is not only his fault, but also Madame's fault for not managing the family properly. As the saying goes, when a husband and wife are united, they can cut through gold. If Wenbin is fortunate enough to have Madame Han's full support, he will have nothing to worry about, and that will be his fortune. Madame Han, do you think I am right?" Jiang Pengji separated herself from everyone in a few words. When the madams heard that, they mistakenly thought that Jiang Pengji was there to be a peacemaker. Master Lanting's words are certainly not wrong. Madame Han laughed awkwardly. She looked a bit reluctant. Jiang Pengji asked her and the other madams to stand up and left after a while. She was there just to eat melons and slack off. Now everyone knew that she had slipped away for work. Jiang Pengji's presence there was like a class teacher watching over the students' evening self-study. Everyone was silent. It was so quiet that the sound of a needle dropping on the ground could be heard. As soon as she left, the originally quiet tea party exploded with a bang, and people started chattering nonstop. The madams looked at Madame Han with complicated expressions. The fact that Master Lanting personally came to mediate the family affairs of his subjects showed that the relationship between Han Yu and his wife was on the verge of breaking down. However, Madame Han was the host of the tea party. Out of etiquette, they couldn't speak freely. They couldn't talk about this topic because they had other topics to talk about. Was that really Master Lanting? What a beautiful girl. I heard that she is still unmarried. It's true. Jiang Pingji's hairstyle had always been that of an unmarried girl. At most she looked more mature than a young girl. A madam in her early 40s said with certainty, "Of course it's true. She is still young. She is a proper virgin." Everyone exclaimed, but after a while they were puzzled. Before they saw the real Jiang Pingji, they all wondered if she was so ugly that no man wanted her, and she was still unmarried at this age. Now that they saw the real Jiang Pingji in person, her appearance and temperament were extraordinary. Not to mention men, even ordinary women would fall in love with her. Why was she still single with such a good appearance? Jiang Pingji expected that she would become the topic of discussion among the madams, but she didn't expect that it would become the fuse of Han Yu and his wife's quarrel. As the tea party ended, the madams went home. The news of Jiang Pingji's sudden appearance at the tea party also spread. Han Yu hurried back home after a long journey. When he heard the news, he immediately went home. Madame Han was sitting in the main hall. The outline of her profile was flickering in the dim candlelight. The crackling of the candlelight could be heard from time to time. She said sarcastically when she saw Han Yu come back, "Lang Jun hasn't come back for 6 days. I accidentally offended Master Lanting today, so you came back in a hurry." Han Yu stopped halfway through the door when he heard this. His nervousness turned into suffocation in his chest. "If you have something to say, just say it. Why are you beating around the bush?" His lord and Han Yu only had a simple relationship. Madame Han had insulted both of them by speculating about the relationship between a man and a woman. A gentleman would die for his bosom friend. His lord was that bosom friend. Han Yu certainly wouldn't allow such malicious slander. "Han Wenbin, are you here to denounce me?" Madame Han was furious. Although she was rude in the daytime, it wasn't enough for Han Yu to come back and scold her. "You're being unreasonable," Han Yu said. "When did you have the intention to punish me?" He finally came back from outside. He couldn't even go home. Did he deserve to spend the night in a guest house? "Not denounce me? Am I being unreasonable?" Madame Han said. "I would like to ask. My husband and Master Lanting are bosom friends. Did you sleep together and have a close relationship? If not, why did she embarrass me in public and interfere in my family affairs? She has her eyes on the world. She is the backbone of the people. I am just a woman in the inner house, but I know what it means to avoid arousing suspicion." Han Yu was enraged when he heard that. Madame Han calmed down and stroked her cheek with her hand. Chapter 1372. First, he sent his son to the Golden Scale Academy from the family school despite her objection, and let his son and daughter go with him. He was good to his son and daughter, but he was unfair to her ruiner. How could a concubine's son and daughter have such good fortune? Madame Han couldn't help but say these words. Her face was full of hatred and jealousy. Han Yu said, "Since you have a grudge against me, why did you get yourself into trouble that year?" After he got married, he handed over the 2 maidservants who had served him to her, and told her to settle them down. He gave them a generous sum of money to remarry. It was obvious that she refused his proposal, and even made them his concubines after his eldest son, Han Run, was born. If Madame Han hadn't asked someone to stop the concubine soup, the concubine's son and daughter wouldn't have been born. Men are fickle since ancient times. They say one thing but think another. Lang Jun obviously wants to keep them. How dare I not do as you say? Madame Han said. I also know that Lang Jun is not infatuated with women. It's better to have 2 beautiful, obedient women in the backyard than Lang Jun learning from those dissolute wastrels and sleeping with women every day, isn't it? If Lanting Duke was me, would Lang Jun still be so fickle? Han Yu said angrily. You are getting more and more ridiculous. What does this have to do with the Lord? Even if he was jealous, he should follow the basic rules. Madame Han saw Han Yu's fierce reaction, and her heart turned colder. She couldn't control her calm demeanor anymore. Han Wenbin, you bastard. That night was destined to be a sleepless one for the Han family. Han Run prepared for the next day and reviewed the key points during the day. He was about to fall asleep when he heard hurried footsteps. Lang Jun, something bad happened. Master and Madam are fighting. Han Run was yawning tiredly. When he heard this, he almost choked, and his drowsiness disappeared. What? Han Run exclaimed in shock. Who's fighting with who? The housekeeper said. Master and Madam are fighting. Han Run opened his eyes wide in shock. He really couldn't associate his gentle wife and his dignified mother with fighting. Why couldn't they just quarrel? Why did they have to fight? Han Run regained his composure after a long while. He hurried all the way to the main courtyard. Before he could even get close to the main gate, he heard a series of clanking sounds. He could still vaguely hear his mother's strange and sharp argument. Han Run was very anxious, but he didn't dare to push open the main gate. His mother was an extremely proud and strong-willed person. She would rather die than let others laugh at her, even if it was her son. Just as he was feeling anxious, the front door suddenly opened. Han Run saw his father's clothes in disarray, his hair disheveled. There were a few bloodstains on his cheek, and his eyes were black and blue. He cut a sorry figure. Han Run was just about to speak, but his voice was stuck in his throat. No matter how hard he tried, he could not spit it out. Han Yu looked down at his son and said, Go in and persuade your mother. I'm going to stay with your Uncle Wei for 2 days. Han Run nodded numbly as he watched his father's back gradually disappear. He heard his mother's cries grow louder. Han Run had seen his mother cry, but no matter how sad she had been, she had always maintained a dignified demeanor and had never been rude in front of others. But now, Han Run thought his father had lost control and hit his mother. But when he entered the room, he found that his mother's clothes and hair were a little messy, but there were no external injuries. Of course, Han Yu had never thought about fighting back. He had been chased and beaten the whole time. Mrs. Han said in a hoarse voice, Run. Han Run answered, Mother, your son is here. Mrs. Han hugged her son and sobbed loudly. On the other side, Han Yu changed into a clean set of clothes and told the housekeeper to warn the servants. Then he went to find Wei Ci. Wei Ci didn't expect Han Yu to visit him so late at night. He was scared by Han Yu's big face. You, Han Yu said. Your sister-in-law scratched me. Oh, Wei Ci said with a smile. The grape trellis fell. Han Yu didn't want to argue with Wei Ci's mischievous character, so he asked him directly. A long time ago, Zixia reminded me to be careful of my wife's family. I'm not sure if you can be more specific. Han Yu and Wei Ci were not only brothers, but also classmates for more than 10 years. Of course, the two of them were very familiar with each other. Wei Ci wouldn't have said that if he wasn't 100% sure. There must be some inside story here. Wenbin also knows that I have learned some skills from the outside world, and I can peep into the secrets of heaven by chance. Wei Ci sighed and said, I didn't dare to say it in detail before, for fear of offending the secrets of heaven. But now I don't. The Lord will ascend to the throne in the future, but Wenbin's wife's family is a burden. Han Yu was puzzled. Although my father-in-law is extreme, he is not someone who doesn't know how to adapt to the circumstances. He really didn't understand why Wei Ci wanted to be a burden. Adapting to the circumstances doesn't mean that I'm not greedy. Wei Ci said, What if Wenbin's wife's family and other aristocratic families intend to overthrow the court and change the throne? To support a puppet emperor to ascend the throne, not only will my sister-in-law be involved, but Wenbin and his eldest son, Han Run, will also die here. For the officials, a wise and assertive emperor was not a good thing. Han Yu's face turned pale after hearing that, but he quickly figured out the key point. When the Lord ascends the throne, it is necessary to reorganize all the industries. The most important one is the salt and iron industry. Wenbin, do you still remember how your sister-in-law's wife's family made a living? Wei Ci reminded him again. If the Lord wants to take back the salt business, won't it affect the foundation of that family? Taking people's money was like killing their parents. How many aristocratic families would oppose the emperor's action? Han Yu's wife's family was not the only aristocratic family that had tasted the sweetness of this industry, who would be willing to let go of it easily. Just as the emperor said, the chaotic times had fostered the ambition of these people, making them forget their original intentions one by one. The salt and iron industry were originally monopolized by the government. If the people were to smelt and boil the salt, they could accumulate millions of wealth in an instant and create a powerful force. However, there would be a huge gap in the country's taxes. When the crisis came, how could the country resist the risks and crises? Han Yu was sweating profusely after listening to just a few words. Try to persuade my sister-in-law. If you can't persuade her, it's better for her to divorce. If she doesn't sever ties with her family, you won't be able to escape death. It was better to destroy 10 temples than to ruin a marriage. Wei Xi didn't want to persuade Han Yu and Mrs. Han to divorce unless he had no other choice. Han Yu was struggling inside and asked Wei Xi, "What you've said, is every word true?" Wei Xi nodded. Han Yu seemed to have lost all his strength. He looked a lot more dispirited. When it's time to make a decision, it's not only for you, but also for the family. In his previous life, Han Yu's wife and eldest son were involved in the conspiracy to usurp the throne. Naturally, Han Yu couldn't escape. If the emperor wanted to protect Han Yu, she couldn't punish the others severely. She could only deal with them gently. In order not to put the emperor in a difficult position, Han Yu committed suicide by swallowing gold. He claimed to the public that he committed suicide to escape punishment. The huge Han family fell apart. Chapter 1373. About this, I will think about it. Han Yu, who was always clear and decisive, showed a rare look of confusion and struggle. He was not a person who showed his emotions on his face, but now he couldn't control his true feelings, which showed how much he struggled and hesitated. Think about it again. Wei Xi sighed and acquiesced. He didn't continue to pressure Han Yu. After all, it was only Han Yu's family business. As his junior, Wei Xi couldn't interfere too much. He could only stop when necessary. Whether Han Yu's marriage was good or bad depended on whether they were fated to be together. You know a little about the Lord's temper. If she wants to do something, she won't be merciful. Wei Xi revealed some information to Han Yu, hinting that Han Yu should hurry up if he wanted to do something, so that he wouldn't be involved. In the previous life, the emperor didn't take back the salt and iron business until after the founding of the country. There were so many variables in this life. Jiang Pingji had targeted Han Yu's family too early because of Wei Xi's influence. It was fine if she didn't know, but now that she had found the salt and iron business, she wouldn't let a few gentry families monopolize it. Han Yu nodded with a pale face. He sounded a little worried. How are you going to explain to the Lord if you reveal this to me? Wei Xi blinked his eyes in surprise. He didn't doubt Han Yu's integrity, but he didn't know that Han Yu was worried about the wrong thing. The Lord values you so much. She certainly doesn't want you to be involved with the Yu family. If you can escape unscathed, the Lord will have less to worry about. In the previous life, the emperor was determined to protect Han Yu. Han Yu was aware of the emperor's determination, so he committed suicide by swallowing gold. The emperor wanted Han Yu to live, and Han Yu didn't want the emperor to break his principles for him. Alas, if they could be together in this life, it would make up for the regrets of the previous life. Han Yu nodded. He successfully misunderstood that Wei Xi said this to him because of Jiang Pingji's instructions. His depressed mood was a little warmer. Wei Xi suggested, "It's getting late. I'll ask someone to prepare some hot water. Why don't you take a bath and tidy up?" Although the candles in the room were not bright, the long bloodstains and bruises on Han Yu's face ruined the beauty of his whole face. Wei Xi had never seen Han Yu in such a miserable state. He couldn't imagine that Mrs. Han would hit him out of anger. He said with a smile, "Fortunately, Shirsaw is not from the women's camp. Otherwise, if she were to be rough with you, I'm afraid I would have to see you in the infirmary of the medical center." This was not a joke. In his previous life, a certain female soldier retired from the army and returned to her hometown to get married. Her partner was her childhood sweetheart. After this childhood sweetheart got married, life gradually changed him into a different person. He changed from a diligent and honest person to a drunkard and lazy person. After the female soldier gave birth, not only did her childhood sweetheart not change for the better, but he also became even worse. In the end, he became addicted to gambling. Not only did he lose all his savings, but he also crazily pawned his wife and daughter to the casino. The thugs of the casino came to capture the female soldier and her daughter. They thought it would be an easy job, but the female soldier rushed home and saw them taking her daughter away. She was so angry that she picked up a pole and beat the thugs to the ground. In front of the entire village, she beat up her husband with her bare hands. When I was killing people on the battlefield, you were still begging for milk in my arms. If Madame Han had the same fighting capacity, she might have had to find someone to summon her soul to see Hanyu if the doctor came a little later. Hanyu said helplessly, "Do you dare to show your mischievous personality in front of others?" He only knows how to laugh at people. He felt that he had lost all his face this year. Wei Xi found a set of clothes that he had never worn before and gave them to Hanyu to change into. The two of them were about the same height, but Hanyu was thinner than Wei Xi, and the clothes were a little loose. Wei Xi's guest room was not well maintained, so it was rude to use it to entertain guests. Therefore, he and Hanyu slept together and made do for the night. The two of them had a good sleeping posture, and there was no intention of being intimate. But no Fujoshi could control herself when two handsome men were lying together. Jiang Pingji was not a Fujoshi, so she did not feel emotional when she saw them. Instead, she sighed deeply. Wenbin was good in every aspect, but he was too good at spoiling people's mood. Jiang Pingji jumped nimbly and flipped over the roof silently. She heard a sound from the tip of her ear. She looked down, and sure enough, she saw a black thing wiggling its plump buttocks. The thing was staring at her with its black eyes. Wei Xi and Hanyu were sleeping soundly, but their daughter was an iron-eating beast with a long history. It had already remembered Jiang Pingji's smell. "What is it?" Jiang Pingji jumped down and landed next to the iron-eating beast. She pulled its ears and said, "Go back and find your father." The iron-eating beast could not understand human language. It stuck out its tongue and licked Jiang Pingji's hand. Its big black eyes were filled with one word: hungry. "Go find your father if you want to eat." Jiang Pingji picked up the little guy and threw it back to the bedroom. "It's rare for me to have the time to come here, but he is so heartless. How dare he keep a mistress in his house?" The iron-eating beast that was abandoned by its mother covered its wounded heart and went to find its poop picker pitifully. The iron-eating beast did not wake Wei Xi up. Instead, it scared Hanyu awake. As soon as he opened his eyes, he saw a shadow of a beast lying next to the bed. He was so scared that his voice cracked. Wei Xi woke up right after Hanyu, but he was not surprised. He said calmly, "It's okay. It's your niece." Hanyu was scared and speechless. He watched Wei Xi skillfully dig out the night snack of the iron-eating beast and threw it back to its nest. "No wonder you are so poor. You spent all your money to raise it." Wei Xi said mischievously, "Daughters should be raised well." Hanyu put on an expression that said, "We are not in the same world." He rolled up the quilt and went back to sleep. He recognized the iron-eating beast. The Lord used to joke that this little thing was Wei Xi's daughter. Feng Zhen also joked that it was the future Lord. Sure enough, his junior brother and the Lord were having an affair. Hanyu stayed with Wei Xi for 2 days and made up his mind on the third day. It would be best if they could get back together. If not, their marriage as husband and wife would come to an end. Before the conversation, Hanyu was still looking forward to it. But after the conversation, he felt physically and mentally exhausted. It was not Hanyu who brought up the separation. It was Mrs. Han. "You and I have slept together for so many years. How can I not know what the person next to me is thinking?" Mrs. Han saw the surprise in Hanyu's eyes. She said quietly, "I would rather bring it up to save face than to hear the word separation come out of your mouth." She knew that their marriage had come to an end since she attacked Hanyu. Mrs. Han was very calm, which made Hanyu feel a little guilty. "It's my fault after all. You are Run and Chier's biological mother, and you will always be." Hanyu thought for a while and said, Run will reach the age of engagement in a few years. When he gets married, there will be a mistress in charge of everything in the mansion. Mrs. Han held back her sadness and said, "Whether you want to find a stepmother for them or not is your business. You don't have to tell me." Han Yu lowered his eyes and prepared the 4 treasures of the study. He picked up the brush and wrote a letter to release his wife. Chapter 1374. Han Yu and his wife had divorced. The news shocked the entire circle of noble women. Everyone was talking about it, and they couldn't help but imagine a few dramas. Mrs. Han left most of the dowry for her 2 sons and future daughter-in-law, and she left with her dowry and guards. After she left, life in the Han mansion went on as usual, but the rumors outside were extremely unpleasant. Han Run couldn't help but ask Han Yu. Rumor has it that father forced mother to leave because he had an affair with Duke Lanting. Is this true? Han Run certainly didn't believe it, but he couldn't help but waver when so many people said the same thing. Han Yu was busy with his work. He put down the pen in his hand and asked calmly when he heard his eldest son's question. "Where did you hear that?" Han Run said, "That's what people say, even the elders in the mansion." Han Yu asked him, "Do you believe it?" Han Run bit his lip. He was terrified in front of his serious father, and shook his head slightly. "You are the eldest son of your mother and father, and you will be the pillar of the family in the future. Do you think the rumors and slanders in the streets and alleys can blind your eyes and affect your judgment?" Han Yu wasn't as calm as he used to be. His voice wasn't heavy, but there was a sense of majesty in his words that made Han Run afraid. "Do you know how these rumors came about? How did they get into our mansion?" Before the divorce, Han Yu treated his eldest son as a child, and his words and attitude were somewhat indulgent. After the divorce, he regarded his eldest son as an adult, one of the men who was responsible for the whole mansion. If Han Run was always so easily deceived, it would be a waste of his years of teaching. Han Run didn't dare to look directly into his father's eyes, and his eyes were evasive. "Father, I know I was wrong. But is there really no inside story about mother and father's divorce?" "Of course there is inside story." Han Yu asked his eldest son. "I can tell you, but can you bear the responsibility?" Han Run's little face was pale, and he hesitated for a long time before he nodded heavily. "Father, please tell me." Han Yu looked down and said, "Do you know what kind of business your grandfather runs?" Han Run shook his head. He really didn't know. Han Yu told him, "Your grandfather's family runs the illicit salt business. I don't have to explain too much to you. You should understand what illicit salt is." When Han Run heard this, the color drained from his already pale face. "Your maternal family is unwilling to relinquish power, so I can't do anything about it." Han Yu looked at his son and said, "Not only that, but they also seized the land by force, expanded the salt pans, and cooperated with several local gentry families to rake in countless ill-gotten gains. The Lord had previously sent messengers to sound out your grandfather and the others. Not only did they have no intention of handing over the illicit salt business, but they even obstructed the emissary's investigation time and time again." After Han Yu and Mrs. Han left, Jiang Pingji noticed that he was in low spirits, so she made a special trip to talk to him. It was only then that Han Yu realized how dangerous his family's situation was. The Yu clan's death wish was bigger than he had imagined. "I was worried about you at first, but now that you've separated from your wife, I don't have to worry anymore." Jiang Pingji was a practical person. She had already noticed Han Yu's Yu clan when Wei Ci revealed to her the ending of Han Yu's previous life. After a year of in-depth investigation, Jiang Pingji had already thought of more than 10 ways to take advantage of the fat sheep. She had also secretly done some tricks. The reason why she hadn't really taken action was that she was afraid of Han Yu and didn't want to hurt the innocent. Now, she could finally sharpen her knife to take advantage of the situation. Han Run was still young, but he knew that salt was a highly profitable industry that concerned the people's livelihood. When the country was divided, his grandfather took advantage of the chaos to get involved in the salt business. Now that Dongqing was more or less stable, he still refused to let go. He was tired of living and wanted to hang himself. Han Run couldn't help but swallow his saliva. He finally realized the importance of the matter. What if the Lord of Lanting wants to take action against my grandfather's family? What about my mother? It was easy to imagine the situation of a woman who married and then divorced. Han Yu patted his son's shoulder and said earnestly, "You and Chi are her sons, and also her last resort. Our relationship as husband and wife has come to an end, but your relationship as a mother and son is not over. Whether she will be good or bad in the future depends on you and your brother's luck." Han Run felt that the weight on his shoulder was extremely heavy. When he thought about his previous thoughts, he felt even more ashamed and wanted to find a hole to hide himself in. What was the difference between him and the Lord of Lanting when he speculated about the relationship between his father and the Lord of Lanting? He was not even as good as those shrews. The rumors about Han Yu and Jiang Pingji were naturally spread by the noble ladies at the tea party. After all, the divorce between Han Yu and his wife happened after that tea party. Jiang Pingji didn't do anything to them. Instead, she brought their husbands over and scolded them harshly. They couldn't even manage the inner chamber well. They allowed their wives to spread false gossip everywhere. Were they incompetent or not? Was it because they had too little work on their hands, so they were all bored out of their minds? They were ignorant and stupid. What vision could those stupid wives have? Most of their children were short-sighted. Jiang Pingji scolded them. The husbands who were scolded went home and reprimanded their wives. Before the wives could cry and shout that they were wronged, Jiang Pingji's messenger came to their door. She organized a popular science class and required the wives to attend 2 classes every 7 days. Each class lasted half a day. After the class, they had to write their reflections. If they had the time to attend tea parties, eat melon seeds and gossip, they might as well use it to enrich their brains that were stuffed with hay, to gain knowledge and broaden their horizons. For a while, the tea parties disappeared from Xiangyang district. The wives in Wanzhou and other places also reduced such activities. Jiang Pingji had completely forgotten her dark history of sneaking to tea parties to eat melon seeds while she was working. However, she was the Lord. Her subordinates didn't dare to remind her at the risk of being slapped. The slap from the wives was a caress. At most, the face would be swollen. The slap from the Lord was an invitation from the King of Hell. His head would fly to the sky. After a series of swift and decisive measures, the gossip disappeared without a trace. Jiang Pingji snorted. She stroked the stiff fur of her daughter and said, "It's because she needs to be taught a lesson." Wei Xi sighed softly. The frequency of the Lord's night raids had increased a lot recently. "How do you plan to deal with those families, my lord?" The salt pans still had to be taken back, but it was a profiteering business after all. Forcefully seizing it would inevitably cause criticism. After all, his lord hadn't ascended the throne yet. "I can't use the crime of smuggling salt to deal with them. Otherwise, people will think that I'm taking it by force." Jiang Pingji stroked her daughter's fur and fed it bamboo shoots. She said, "They're not united. Besides selling salt, they have other illegal businesses. There are many ways to deal with them. I've governed Dongqing too well. It gives them the illusion that they're in a prosperous era. They've forgotten that it's a chaotic world now. The rules and laws are decided by my fists. If they have the guts, they'll either rebel against me now or admit defeat." If it weren't for the reputation that Wei Xi yearned for, Jiang Pingji would have sent people to force them. Why would she resort to peaceful means before resorting to force? Wei Xi smiled and said, "You're right, my lord." Chapter 1375. Madame Han's family name was Tao. Although her family was not as rich as the Fangs, it was much richer than Ten Fangs. The Tao's genealogy could be traced back to before the 16 kingdoms, but it was after the establishment of Dongqing. Their performance before that was mediocre. Before the establishment of Dongqing, the ancestors of the Taos had sharp eyes and decisively placed a heavy bet on the founding father of Dongqing. After the establishment of the country, Madame Tao was one of the royal family's confidants. She helped the royal family to monitor the southern salt affairs. After decades, she had accumulated a lot of wealth. Until more than 20 years ago, when 2 emperors of Dongqing made a mess and ignored the court, Madame Tao took advantage of the loopholes and cooperated with the local gentry to control the salt affairs in the southern territory of Dongqing. She did a lot of tricks on the taxes. After tasting the sweetness too many times, she became bolder and bolder. Of course, the grand occasion of adding oil to the fire and flowers also scared many people who were still clear-minded. They never thought that God would be so powerful. Dongqing was invaded by the northern borderline, the earthquake in Shangjing, and the capital was moved to Qinzhou. After a series of tricks, Dongqing was played to death by the royal family. Then there was the separation of feudal vassals. All the forces fought fiercely for a little territory. Under such circumstances, who would pay attention to the illicit salt business? Madame Tao and several other powerful forces tore up the last fig leaf and openly occupied the illicit salt business. In just a few years, they had accumulated a huge wealth that was even greater than Jiang Pingji's. To make an analogy, they could not even be compared to the northern borderline, which was a big fat sheep in the past. It could be seen how rich Madame Tao and the others were. How could Madame Tao and the others be willing to let go? How could Jiang Pingji allow Madame Tao to continue to occupy? That was the irreconcilable contradiction. That was the root cause of Han Yu and his wife's divorce. Otherwise, they would not have divorced so easily for the sake of their two legitimate sons. Han Yu was well aware of that, but Madame Han did not notice it. She left most of the dowry to her two legitimate sons and returned to her hometown with a small part of her assets and servants. In order to preserve her dignity, Madame Han was very calm in front of Han Yu, but she could not help crying when she was alone. "My lady, why did you do this?" The dowry nanny looked at her dejected wife, who had grown up with a baby's milk, and felt very uncomfortable. Madame Han said, "I just find it hard to calm down. The Tao family doesn't know about the divorce between the First Lady and the son-in-law yet." The dowry nanny said worriedly, "If they go back like this, I'm afraid." Madame Han pretended to be calm. "Nanny, don't worry." The dowry nanny sighed. Her voice was filled with deep worry. How could a divorced daughter receive the same treatment as when she was still single? Madame Han suddenly remembered what Jiang Pingji had asked her before. "I'm very curious. If Wenbin was Bogeo and his wife was Qi Chaolan, would you also be rejected by your own family?" Madame Han suddenly shook her head. No matter how bad her situation was, she would never fall to the state of a stray dog. Everyone in the Tao family was surprised by Madame Han's arrival. After asking about it, both parents' expressions changed. "You've divorced Wenbin?" Father Tao's voice sounded very serious, with a hint of reprimand and fierceness. Because Madame Han was tired from the long journey, her expression was rather tired, but she still wanted to raise her spirits and not lose her etiquette in front of her parents. "Yes," she said faintly. "Your daughter and Wenbin have divorced." Father Tao's fingers paused in midair. His fingertips trembled slightly with his heavy breathing, showing his master's tumbling guilt. After a while he reprimanded Madame Han, "Silly. You rebellious daughter." Madame Han's tired face turned into puzzlement. She said, "Wenbin and I are not fated to be together. If he wants to divorce, what can I do?" Father Tao said, "Even so, you shouldn't have divorced at this time. What a rebellious daughter. Are you trying to anger your father to death?" Madame Han was stunned by the reprimand. Father Tao lost control of his emotions. If not for Mother Tao's persuasion, Madame Han would have been reprimanded even worse. Mother Tao said, "Master, what we should do now is not to reprimand your daughter. We should think of a way to get through this." Under Mother Tao's persuasion, Father Tao's emotions calmed down a lot. Madame Han's heart skipped a beat. She was secretly guessing what difficult problem the Tao family had encountered when Mother Tao asked her, "I know your character. You have given birth to Wenbin's children. Even if you don't have any credit, you have worked hard. Why does he want to divorce you?" Father Tao and Mother Tao did not care about the divorce between their daughter and son-in-law. They cared about why the two of them wanted to divorce at this sensitive time. What was the reason for the divorce? Madame Han was keenly aware of her parents' abnormality, but she could not figure out the reason, so she could only tell the truth. In Madame Han's opinion, the reason for the divorce was that the relationship between husband and wife had been worn away by life. She and Han Yu had different ideas. Both of them were stubborn and refused to give in. Moreover, Jiang Pingji was between them. It was only a matter of time before their marriage broke down. Father Tao and Mother Tao did not speak for a long time. Their eyes flickered, as if they were weighing the deep meaning behind the words. The atmosphere between the three of them was a little gloomy. After dinner, she privately summoned the housekeeper of the Tao family and asked him about the recent events in the family. The housekeeper had served the Tao family for many years. He was one of Father Tao's most trusted confidants, so he knew a lot of things. Faced with Madame Han's inquiry, the housekeeper rarely hesitated. Madame Han said, "As soon as I came back, I heard that the Tao family encountered an insurmountable obstacle. As the daughter of the Tao family, how could I stay out of it?" The housekeeper said, "First Lady, it is not that we cannot talk about it. It is just that Master and Madam are worried about you, so they did not mention it." Madame Han frowned and said, "Just say it." The housekeeper mentioned that Jiang Pingji had sent people to investigate the local illegal salt business and taxes. Madame Han's face turned pale when she heard it. Master and Madam are also worried that Lu Shi is obviously up to no good. I am afraid that he wants to meddle in the salt business. First Lady and young Master Tao are divorcing at this time. We have to worry that Lu Shi might have heard some rumors and forced young Master Tao to divorce you. After all, Han Yu was Jiang Pingji's trusted confidant. If she took action against Madame Tao, took back the salt business, and reorganized the taxes, then how could Madame Tao, who was already in the mire, get out of it easily? Madame Tao could not escape, and Madame Han, who was born in the Tao family, could not escape either. As the Tao family's son-in-law, Han Yu would most likely be implicated. Hearing this, Madame Han's tired face became a bit lifeless. Although salt looked ordinary, it was a necessity for the people in the world. It seemed to be worthless, but it was actually a huge profit. Because everyone needed it, there was no worry that salt could not be sold. It could make people rich in an instant. Chapter 1376. If she was still Han Yu's wife, based on how much Jiang Pingji valued Han Yu, she would probably hold back for fear of harming the innocent. In the end, she left without saying a word. Jiang Pingji had no more scruples. She was afraid that she would not be merciful. The housekeeper didn't say anything, but judging from his expression, he agreed with Madame Han's words. It was unwise to leave at this juncture. The housekeeper sighed. Now I only hope that it was not Lord Lanting's idea to leave the First Lady. Madame Han was anxious and uneasy. Now that she thought about it carefully, she couldn't figure out the real reason why she left Han Yu. Madame Han stayed in the Tao's house. Although she didn't go out every day, she could feel that the atmosphere in the house had become weird. According to the servant girl's report, carriages were coming and going in an endless stream outside the Tao's house. The frequency of the gentry families who were on good terms with them became extremely frequent. She smelled the scent of an impending storm. It turned out that Madame Han's premonition was right. Madame Tao and the other families were discussing to make trouble. Even though the salt business had always been controlled by the state, Madame Tao and the others had enjoyed the benefits for decades. Especially after the world was in chaos, they had even taken off the last fig leaf and regarded the salt business as their private property. How could they be willing to hand over the money tree to an outsider? Many of them even had a crazy idea. Jiang Pingji was just a feudal lord with a relatively large influence. She was not the emperor yet. She was not the emperor. What right did she have to ask Madame Tao and the others to hand over the salt business? In Jiang Pingji's words, one wouldn't feel pity if they lost something that they had never had. However, once they had it, no one would let it go if an outsider wanted to take it away. In order to protect this item, many people would even take the risk out of desperation and go crazy. Madame Tao and the others were typical examples. Madame Tao had a big share of the illicit salt business, and the other families had also tasted the benefits. Each family had made a lot of money. This force was already like a grasshopper on a rope. They were bound together for good or bad. None of them wanted Jiang Pingji to take away their interests. However, Jiang Pingji was so powerful that they had to come up with a perfect plan. Otherwise, they would lose everything. They had thought of many ways, but there were only two ways in front of them. Or they could bow their heads and become a well-behaved aristocrat, content with a little bit of wealth. Or they could rise up and resist, using small to win big. They were not willing to be the former, so they could only choose the latter. Someone said, "Damn it. If I had known that Lu Shi had such wild ambitions, I would have rebelled against her before the situation in Dongqing was settled." The situation in Dongqing was still unsettled. A few feudal lords were locked in a fierce battle. This was a good opportunity for them to fish in troubled waters. Now Su Fei, Su Bei, and Huang Song had successively knelt down. Dongqing had become Jiang Pingji's sole authority. What could they use to confront her head-on? The other person thought about it and said, "Even so, it's not like there's no other way." When Papa Tao heard this, he asked the man, "What do you mean?" The man reminded, "Gentlemen, please do not forget that other than Lu Shi, there is still a feudal vassal in Dongqing." Everyone was stunned for a moment, and only after a long while did they remember something. Dongqing's Zhangzhou was still in Yang Tao's hands. Papa Tao asked, "What do you mean by that? Are you asking us to switch to Yang Tao?" The man shook his head and said, "No. When we turn to Yang Tao covets the salt business. Isn't that the same as circling back? It's better to frame Yang Tao and make Lu Shi and Yang Tao fight. This way, no matter who wins or loses, both of them will be greatly weakened and won't be able to take care of us. They could also take the opportunity to use their savings, recruit soldiers, and expand their influence. When that time comes, they would not be held back by others. Wouldn't that be the best of both worlds?" When they heard this suggestion, everyone was a little convinced. No, they were a little terrified. A dynasty with 100 years of history and 1,000 years of aristocratic families. History had proven that the change of dynasties was an unstoppable trend. The aristocratic families could survive the change of dynasties, but the royal family could not. They would inevitably be treated as the remnants of the previous dynasty and wiped out, let alone continue. Due to various reasons, although the aristocratic families controlled a lot of resources, they were more inclined to invest in politics rather than take a gamble. Of course, there might be another reason. For example, they were not capable enough, or did they not know what was going on? No matter what, this conversation ended on a sour note. The balance in everyone's hearts was wavering. On one side was the lucrative salt business, and on the other side was the risk of occupying the salt business. It was not a good choice. In the end, their greed won over their reason. Jiang Pingji was a meticulous person. Since she had set her eyes on the salt business, she would not fight a battle unprepared. A year ago, she not only sent messengers, but she also analyzed the aristocratic families and planted many spies. These spies monitored the movements of the aristocratic families led by Madame Tao, and passed the news to Jiang Pingji. She attached great importance to the salt business. Once there was news, it would be passed to her as quickly as possible. While Madame Tao and the others were hesitating, Jiang Pingji had already received the relevant news. Heh, if they really dare to rebel, I respect them as men. You can't even compare to me. Are you still a man? Tudafetio. How can they hide their tricks from great sage Zhang's fiery eyes? They are showing their fox's tail. Qingfeng Banshui. Alas, they can only think of provoking the streamer and Yang Tao to fight, so that they can reap the benefits. The salted fish in the streaming room secretly scolded Madame Tao for being insidious. She was so greedy that she didn't even know death was at hand. Except for Zhuge Liang, who pretended to be a serious strategist, the other salted fish were still eating melon seeds and ridiculing her. Lao Siji Lianmeng. With all due respect, whoever competes with you in being decisive is a sissy. You can form an alliance if you want. You can kill an acquaintance if you want. A white knife goes in and a red knife comes out. Which man in the world dares to compete with her in manliness? Nongfu Shangquan Yudiangshuan. Ha ha ha, sharp criticism. There are no men and women in front of the streamer, only girls and girls with big penises. Jiang Pingji habitually ignored the salted fish's daily naughtiness. Wei Ci asked her, "How do you plan to deal with these people?" Jiang Pingji said, I was worried that after a year of cultivation, I have no reason to find trouble with Zhengza. Madame Tao and the others are so considerate, and took the initiative to give me a ready-made weakness. Wouldn't it be a pity if I cut the Gordian knot and killed them all at once? Make the best use of everything. Even the enemy had value. It would be a pity to waste it. Jiang Pingji had been eyeing Yang Tao's Zhangzhou for a long time. However, the previous alliance had ended, and there was no suitable reason to kill the alliance. Since Madame Tao had helped her solve this problem, she didn't mind letting Madame Tao and the others live for a few more days. Wei Si, I couldn't help but be speechless. You mean, to let them set up a trap and involve the Duke of Zhengza? Jiang Pingji smiled wickedly and touched Wei Si's lips with her index finger. Wrong. Not only Zhengza, I want to swallow the whole of Nansheng. Dragging Zhengza into the water is just the first step. She was greedy beyond measure. How could she be satisfied with a small Zhangzhou? Chapter 1377. Even if Madame Tao and the others racked their brains, they would never have thought that Jiang Pingji would be so cunning. They were still dreaming of being the fishermen who would benefit from the fight between the sandpiper and the clam. Little did they know that while their dreams were plump, the reality was very harsh. When Jiang Pingji told Qiguan Rang and the others about Madame Tao's wishful thinking, Qiguan Rang frowned slightly, and there was some ridicule in his eyes. Qiguan Rang thought for a long time, before he could think of a more suitable adjective. Are somewhat naive. Jiang Pingji smiled. They are indeed quite naive. Yang Si chuckled and said, Our Lord has a keen eye. How could she take the bait so easily? Yang Tao was not someone easy to deal with. How could he be so easily schemed against? Madame Tao and the others wanted to sit on the mountain and watch the tigers fight. They really thought too highly of themselves. Do they have the right to sit on the fishing platform? This was still a euphemism. In the words of the salted fish in the live streaming room, Madame Tao and the others had no idea at all. Didn't he take a look at his own capabilities? Did he have the qualifications to boast in front of these two giants? Even Huang Song and the Su brothers hadn't managed to do it, yet Madame Tao and the rest dared to dream about it? Jiang Pingji clicked her tongue and glanced at Yang Si from the corner of her eye. Yang Si was like a spring breeze in recent days. Even though Yang Si had been busy with Hanyu for a few days, he still couldn't hide the pride in his heart. Humph. Show off. Jiang Pingji smiled and said, Jingrong, you are wrong. Madame Tao and the others imitate Jiang Taigong in fishing. I am the fish that is willing to take the bait. If Madame Tao didn't stir up trouble, Jiang Pingji would have to think hard about how to make Yang Tao unhappy. Madame Tao set up a trap for her and Yang Tao, which was exactly what she wanted. Qiguan Rang said coldly, That's exactly what my lord wishes for, but Yang Tao won't take the bait so easily. Everyone had analyzed a few feudal vassals in the past. Those who were led by their lord were mostly ambitious people who had their eyes on the throne. However, there were also lords who were more relaxed, such as Yang Tao. Yang Tao's original intention for the uprising was to avenge his father, Yang Jian. Ever since Zhao Xiao's death, Yang Tao's hatred for his father's murder had been completely lifted. As a lord, Yang Tao lacked a bit of wildness. He had more than enough defense, but not enough offense. Yang Tao was so easygoing that if Madame Tao set up a trap, he might not bite the bait. He also had Yan Lin, who was extremely difficult to deal with. Madame Tao could fool Yang Tao, but she might not be able to fool Yan Lin. Salted fish also have dreams. Maybe Madame Tao's dream can come true. Jiang Pingji spoke like a gangster. She changed the topic and said with a smile, Moreover, what we need is a reason to take action, not a reasonable reason to take action. As long as there was a reason, it did not need to be reasonable. Which of Jiang Pingji's confidants was not a shrewd person? Their lord was such a hooligan, and they were also tired. The princesses were mentally exhausted, but in the live stream room, Salted Fish was happily chatting away. Tuttefaccio. The host's style is exactly the same as that of a country that claims to be the world's police. She's the most like a hooligan cop. Sincere invitation to join. As expected of an ancient giant. The bullet screen is always accurate. The host's hooligan behavior was indeed very similar to that of a certain country. Both of them would take action as long as they had a reason. They did not care whether the reason was convincing or not, or whether it was reasonable. Qingfeng Wenpu. You're capable but willful. Qingzui Lemon Slice. The newbie in the live broadcast room is trembling. You can talk about politics here? Aren't you afraid of being banned? Lao Siji Lianmeng. You're indeed a newbie in the live broadcast room. You don't know that not only China, but the world's #1 hooligan can't do anything about it, okay? TSK, don't talk about politics. You won't be banned even if you serialize an article with the 8th letter in the live broadcast room. Don't talk about politics or serialize an article with the 8th letter. You can even form a group to demonstrate with the bullet screen. Nongfu Shangquan Yudiangshuan. I don't agree with this metaphor. The host is obviously a very reasonable person. The salted fish audience did not want to defame Jiang Pingji. They just expressed their feelings. This topic was quickly drowned out by wave after wave of bullet screen comments. On the other side, Jiang Pingji and the princesses were still discussing. Jiang Pingji noticed that Wei Xi's expression was somewhat hesitant to speak, so she took the time to ask. Zixiao, do you have a different opinion? Wei Xi said. Reporting to my lord, I think it's still too early to mobilize the troops. How can we mobilize the troops now? We have to wait until the beginning of spring next year at the earliest. Jiang Pingji shook her head and sighed. The continuous wars have made the people of all the provinces suffer. If we want to mobilize the troops against Yang Tao, we have to recuperate for a year or two, to let everyone recover their strength. Even if Jiang Pingji's family was rich, she had suffered a great loss after fighting the Su brothers and Huang Song in succession. In order to increase her income, she set her eyes on the salt business controlled by Madame Tao and the others, hoping to get back at them. If Madame Tao and the others were sensible, Jiang Pingji did not mind them taking the family assets they had previously accumulated and retreating in one piece. At most, she would restrict this faction of people from entering officialdom and suppress their ambitions. Who would have expected them to be so ambitious and insatiable? Jiang Pingji could not continue to indulge them. Salt was related to the people's livelihood. Its importance was comparable to copper and iron. Unless one's brain was kicked by a donkey, she would not allow private forces to control the salt business. Madame Tao and the others were so insensible. If Jiang Pingji did not cut them into pieces, she would write her name backwards. When Wei Xi heard this, he knew that his lord had misunderstood, so he hurriedly explained. That's not what I meant. Wei Xi said. The situation in Nanxing is quite chaotic at the moment. The feudal lords and the 4 factions of Nanman are confronting each other. It's like a raging fire. If my lord hastily intervenes, you will definitely be accused of aiding the barbarians. It's really not appropriate. This was like when Jiang Pingji attacked the northern borderline. Meng Zhan wanted to stab her in the back, but he ended up being condemned by everyone. Similarly, when the feudal lords of Nanxing joined forces to fight against Nanman, Jiang Pingji would be reviled by the world for taking advantage of the situation. This accusation could not be washed clean by the water army. Jiang Pingji said, Zixiao's words make sense. However, as long as they don't destroy the 4 factions of Nanman, I can't use my troops against them? The 4 factions of Nanman had become the protection umbrella for those rookies? Wei Xi shook his head and said, the various forces in Nanxing will unite to fight against Nanman. The outcome will be clear by next summer. He had the experience of his previous life. Analyzing the situation in this life, he felt that the 4 factions of Nanman were about to be destroyed. Jiang Pingji said, Zixiao, do you hope that I will wait until they are badly injured and then reap the benefits? Wei Xi nodded. Didn't Her Majesty take advantage of this in her previous life? And Shui defeated the 4 factions of Nanman and massacred more than 638,000 people. He was also badly injured and had no power to defend himself. In the end, Shui's Nanxing was taken advantage of by Her Majesty, who had sent troops south. It didn't take much effort to subdue the whole of Nanxing. Even if the lord in this life was doing much better than Her Majesty in her previous life, The situation in Nanxing was very different from her previous life. Wei Xi didn't want her to take risks. Jiang Pingji said, "It doesn't seem to be a long time from the beginning of spring to the summer solstice. We can still afford to wait." It was rare that Qi Guanrang didn't object. He only glanced at Wei Xi from the corner of his eyes. Finally, he looked down coldly. Chapter 1378. Zai, are we going to let the cooked duck fly away just like that? Jiang Pingji was somewhat indignant. She had already made up her mind to kill Yang Tao, but Wei Xi told her that she could not do it. She was really frustrated. Wei Xi smiled and said, "My lord, you're wrong. I'm not watching the cooked duck fly away. I'm just watching them cook better." Jiang Pingji rolled her eyes and chuckled. "Zixiao, I like what you said." Wei Xi lowered his head slightly, and the corners of his lips curled up a little. Qi Guanrang, Yang Xi, and a few others who knew the situation looked on coldly and snorted in their hearts. She had kicked over the basin of cold dog food. Jiang Pingji had to adjust her plan, but Madame Tao did not have the same tacit understanding. She was still scratching her head and thinking of stirring up trouble. How could they provoke the relationship between the two feudal lords and make them fight each other? This problem was extremely challenging and stumped a group of people. If Jiang Pingji was a man, they could search for the most beautiful women in the world and follow the example of their predecessors. For a man, the humiliation of being cuckolded and the hatred of having one's wife stolen were more ingrained than any other humiliation. However, Jiang Pingji was a woman and Yang Tao was a man. Unless one of them was a gay man or a G-man, it would not work. It might not work. I heard that Lu Shi is not close to men. He only has women to serve him. One of the people said something shocking. Yang Tao seems to like men too. He has a close relationship with his advisor, Yin Lin. The two of them married each other's sisters. They often sit at the same table, lie together, and sleep together. I'm afraid it's impossible to say that there is nothing going on between them. Everyone was speechless for a long time after hearing this. It made sense, and they could not refute it. They were originally about to give up on the honey trap, but after this person said this, they were actually a little eager to try it. Compared to other strategies that cut flesh and let blood out, this honey trap was cheap and the cost was low. It was very cost-effective. It's not right, it's not right, it's not right. This operation was too flashy. What if the boat capsized accidentally? Many of the old antiques were more inclined to conventional operations, such as forging Yang Tao's troops crossing the border to kill and plunder, or forging Jiang Pingji's troops crossing the border to kill Yang Tao's men, using this as a pretext to stir up conflict between the two parties. In addition to camouflage, they could also use financial resources to bribe Yang Tao's confidants. There was no loyalty in the world that couldn't be shaken by money. Madame Tao had money. As long as they took out enough money, they could naturally win over Yang Tao's confidants. He would first pretend to surrender and betray Jiang Pingji's military secrets. When the time was right, he would betray Yang Tao. Perfect. This was the normal style of double dealing. A honey trap, or something like that, was a disgrace to the culture. Unexpectedly, in the end, it was this honey trap that gained the upper hand. Everyone from the Tao clan. The reason why he chose the honey trap was naturally not because it was the most flirtatious operation, but because it was the most stealthy and practical. If they followed the conventional method of framing and framing, as long as the leaders of the two parties were not blinded by anger, they would be able to find them very quickly by following the clues. This was too risky. It was better to use a honey trap. There weren't many people who knew about it, so it was easier to keep it a secret. Even if the matter was exposed, he could abandon the beauty at that time, wash his hands clean, and escape unscathed. How exactly would it be implemented? Everyone from the Tao clan locked their gazes on the person who proposed this flirtatious operation. Since you were the one who proposed it, then you should carry it out. What was a honey trap? Nurture rebellious officials to confuse them. Enter a beautiful woman to confuse them. In short, it was to use beauty as a sugar-coated bullet to break down the enemy's will and make them lose the ability to fight. Given that Yang Tao and Jiang Pengji were of different genders, and their sexual orientation was a mystery, the conventional honey trap might not work. The honey trap had to be changed. He ordered someone to find the portraits of Yang Tao, Yin Lin, and Jiang Pengji. The three of them were public figures, so their portraits were not considered secrets. Yang Tao's temperament was open and straightforward. He often fought with ordinary soldiers. Yin Lin was not an aloof Prince Charming, who kept people 1,000 miles away. Not to mention Jiang Pengji. Not to mention the entire Wanzhou, who among the hundreds of thousands of people in the entire Xiangyang district, did not know her face. The three of them were people who often showed their faces in front of ordinary people. Naturally, there were many portraits of them. This man took the portraits of the three of them, and even found witnesses, who had seen the three of them. He searched everywhere according to the pictures. He managed to find substitutes who looked 50 to 60% similar. They dressed up a little, practiced their manners, and imitated them. Even though they lacked charm and temperament, their appearances were 70 to 80% similar. Because they were found according to their appearances, the three of them had different backgrounds and ages. If they did not speak, they could deceive unfamiliar people. Once they spoke, they would reveal their flaws. The man gave the families of the three a generous sum of money. They signed a death contract and bought their lives. Do whatever I want you to do. Don't do what you shouldn't do. Otherwise, your families can only take the money and go to hell to enjoy their lives. The three of them trembled. In the face of coercion from power, what other way out was there except to compromise? Thinking of their families and the money the man gave them, the three of them knew that their future was uncertain, but they still had to bite the bullet. The man sent substitutes who looked like Yang Tao and Yin Lin to Wanzhou, and sent the one who looked like Jiang Pengji to Zhangzhou. It was worth mentioning that the three of them were all men, including the one who looked like Jiang Pengji. Will this work? Seeing this, Madame Tao and the others were secretly worried. Of course it will work. It's hard to believe. The three of them are so uncouth. How can they take on such a heavy responsibility? How could the three of them, who came from a remote village or a brothel, incite two feudal lords to fight each other? Even if they took off their clothes, no one would be willing to look at them. Not to mention their ability to learn. Even their speech and mannerisms could not compare to the real deal. When they saw the three impostors speak, they revealed their badly worn and yellowed teeth, not to mention the drama. They could not imagine Yang Tao, Yin Lin, or Jiang Pengji revealing their missing yellowed teeth as they spoke. Not only that, but the three of them also had strong accents and bad breath. No matter how good-looking their faces were, they would not look good. It started with their looks, and ended with yellowed teeth and bad breath. I have my own plan. Hearing this, Madame Tao and the others could not help but secretly roll their eyes. They wanted to see what kind of tricks this guy had up his sleeves. Jiang Pengji, who was watching them closely, was also very curious. She brought a small stool over, and waited for the show to begin. I remember that Hanmei met Jingza in Shaoyang, right? Jiang Pengji nibbled on melon seeds, and looked at Li Yun with a smile. Li Yun did not understand, but he said honestly, I have indeed seen them. Jiang Pengji said, after you finish training the troops these few days, remember to walk around the city gate, and see if there are people who look like them. Li Yun was surprised. How could they appear in Wanzhou? Jiang Pengji said, I didn't say they are the real deal. I heard they are high-quality imitations. I just don't know if they look like them. Li Yun did not understand the meaning of real deal and high-quality imitations, so he could only agree in a daze. Whatever the Lord said was the truth. It was rare that she was in a good mood, so he had to coax her more. His Lord was in a good mood and found less trouble. His own oner could also get off work earlier to accompany him. This was probably the tragedy of having two workers. Thinking of Yang Si, he felt much better. Chapter 1379. Hanmei, have you encountered any problems these past 2 days? Why are you always frowning? Li Yun tried his best to finish his meal. He was about to wipe his mouth and head to the army camp when his father suddenly called him. He blinked his eyes blankly and asked, What's the problem? Everything went smoothly today, I'm not frowning. Xie Qian took advantage of Shangguan Wan's absence to question his son in a low voice. Not frowning? Then why do you always look troubled when you come back every day? Xie Qian was now an old master who did not care about anything. He only cared about enjoying his life. His daily routine was to practice martial arts, take a walk, and teach his granddaughter Lin Wan. Because the female class of the Golden Scale Academy had to learn the art of body refining. To let his granddaughter win at the starting line, Xie Qian asked for a detailed diagram. He studied it before teaching it to his granddaughter. What was gratifying was that Lin Wan was indeed the descendant of a famous family. Her innate talent was even better than her father's. The art of body refining that only women could practice had endless uses. Coupled with the Xie family's unique skills, Lin Wan improved rapidly. Xie Qian dared to guarantee that when his granddaughter reached the age of initiation, she would definitely be invincible among her peers. His granddaughter had a bright future, and his son and daughter-in-law were Jiang Pingji's trusted confidants. Xie Qian's retirement life was exceptionally comfortable. He did not want external variables to disrupt the current situation. Li Yun did not understand, but the person asking was Xie Qian, his father and master. Naturally, he would answer everything he knew. I'm just a little confused. Xie Qian raised his brows and said, as long as it doesn't involve important secrets, what doubts can't be said? Xie Qian could not help but feel a headache coming on. In order for Li Yun to have the ability to protect himself and avoid possible enemies, he had extremely strict requirements for Li Yun's martial arts. Xie Qian created a simple and peaceful living environment for Li Yun, so that he could focus on mastering martial arts. The master and disciple lived as savages in the mountains for more than 10 years. There were pros and cons to this approach. The pros were obvious, but so were the cons. His son's talent seemed to be focused on martial arts and commanding troops. He also walked the path of righteousness, but the people under Master Lanting's tent were all black-hearted. Every time he saw his son squatting in a crowd of black sesame seeds, he was afraid that his son would be at a disadvantage. Congenital deficiencies could be made up for later. He did not seek to be as cunning as a fox, but he sought the ability to protect himself. Alas, there was little effect. Li Yun also knew that he was at a disadvantage. When faced with a difficult problem that he could not decide on, he had to consult his father. It's not that I can't tell you about this, Li Yun said. A few days ago, the Lord assigned me a task. She asked me to look out for people who look like the Duke of Zhengze, Yang Tao, and Yin Lin. At first, I didn't think much of it, but after I came back, I was terrified. Li Yun had been keeping an eye on the city gates for the past few days, his heart filled with worry. He was not good at concealing his emotions, so naturally he appeared to be preoccupied. The more you think about it, the more terrifying it is. Why? Even someone as astute as Xie Qian did not understand what Jiang Pingji was up to. Li Yun may seem naive in other matters, but his intuition is extremely accurate. Everything is peaceful under the Lord's rule. The only trouble is from the Tao family. Someone who looks like Lord Zhengze and Yin Lin popped up at this critical moment. I'm worried that there's something fishy going on. Li Yun added, the Lord never fights a battle unprepared. There must be a deeper meaning to her targeting these two people. I'm not worried about anything else. I'm just worried that I'll miss these two people and give them a chance to stir up trouble. This is my dereliction of duty, Xie Qian said. You suspect that the two people Lu Shi asked you to target are related to the Tao family? Li Yun nodded. Xie Qian tapped his finger on the table and frowned slightly. As a member of Sunset Glow's elderly pension group, Xie Qian rarely came into contact with political affairs. He did not have many sources of information, so he could not analyze anything. However, he had to remind Li Yun of one thing. If these two people really appear, you must pay attention to their movements. Send people to keep a close eye on them at all times, Xie Qian said. They look like Yang Tao and Yin Lin. Although they are not real people, in the eyes of the people they are considered half-real people. If something happens to these two people in Wanzhou, once someone spreads the news, it will be easily misunderstood as Lu Shi humiliating and slandering Yang Tao and Yin Lin. You must be careful. Li Yun nodded. looking like he had learned something. Perhaps Xie poisonous words had hit him. But on the second day, Li Yun received news of the appearance of his targets. He hurriedly informed the Lord of the news. Jiang Pingji's lifeless eyes suddenly lit up. The past few days have been very boring. Finally, someone can relieve my boredom. Li Yun held back the words that had welled up in his throat. Everyone was extremely busy. How could the Lord still say the words very boring so easily? Looking at the many teachers, who were not even middle-aged and were about to go bald, wouldn't the Lord's conscience hurt? My Lord, it's still. Li Yun dutifully reminded her that it was still working hours. As the Lord, she could not take the lead in skipping work. Jiang Pingji said, I am the Lord. I have to do everything myself. Don't those who take my salary feel guilty? Li Yun's lips moved, but he could not find the words to retort. His Lord's logic was very reasonable. He was speechless. Li Jiamaku. I, my Lord, will skip work, wither into dust. Being a boss is to have a legitimate reason to skip work. Otherwise, what's the point of paying so much money? Sheniyo. I'm secretly excited. I wonder how similar Yang Tao and Yin Lin's high imitations are to the real deal. Yang Tao and Yin Lin were also handsome men, who ranked highly on the attractiveness list. The former was bright and energetic, while the latter was dignified and romantic. However, the live stream was always following Jiang Pingji's perspective. The number of times they appeared could be counted on one hand. A group of good-looking fans could only hold on to the screenshots of the live stream to lick their faces. After so many years, the material was no longer fresh. They eagerly awaited new material. Even if they were high imitations, they could still satisfy their cravings. Lao Ciji Lianmeng. Streamer, can you stop bullying the little angel Han Mei? He's so hot and cute. Li Yun, Xie Zhe, and Qin Gong were recognized by Jiang Pingji as the three main mascots. Li Yun was also a veteran, and the favorite of the generation. He had countless fans. Jiang Pingji looked at Li Yun's face and sighed faintly. If not for my good looks, how would I have the right to be bullied? Didn't he know that she valued appearances? Hitting was a sign of affection, scolding was a sign of love, and when one was deeply in love, one would kick him. Not beating Li Yun to death to express her love was already the greatest restraint she could muster. Li Yun was dumbfounded. Very quickly, Li Yun felt that he had found the answer. Even though he knew that the two men were impostors, their looks were undeniable. The Duke of Zhengze and Mr. Yin Xiaoyang are indeed rare handsome men in the world. It's a pity that the two of them didn't learn half of their charm. What a pity. Li Yun spoke with a straight face, but Jiang Pingji asked, don't you feel that the two men below are gay? Li Yun was at a loss. Beggars, Jiang Pingji muttered to herself, forget it. I'd better not taint a righteous and straight man like you. The live stream room was filled with bullet screens, thanking Jiang Pingji for sparing the little angel Li Yun. Chapter 1380. When the two impostors arrived at Xiangyang district, they did not know that they had been targeted by Jiang Pingji the moment they appeared. They were all ordinary people. Occasionally, they would daydream that they would rise to the sky and stand out from the crowd. The truth was that one of them was a bandit, and the other was an errand boy in the tavern. What they all had in common was that their faces were good-looking and upright. There was no one else like them in a 5-kilometer radius. He was greedy and lazy by nature. When he was a bandit, he relied on his good looks and dared to hook up with the bandit leader's woman. Squatting in the restaurant to run errands, as soon as the age is made up of night clothes. He didn't think there was anything wrong with being a prostitute. Every day he welcomed and sent people off. He was addicted to this kind of life where he could enjoy wealth without having to work. It was good enough to be able to survive in troubled times. What was there to be picky about? They had thought that the days would repeat themselves. But who would have thought that fate would play a huge joke on them? The two of them lived a better life than before. They wore brocade clothes that they would never have dared to dream of in their entire lives, and became rich young masters in the eyes of outsiders. Of course, there was no such thing as a free lunch in the world. Everything they enjoyed had to be exchanged for. Jiang Pingji leaned against the window and looked down. She smiled and said, they look quite similar. Even though it's a high-quality imitation, I still put a lot of effort into it. Li Yun said, My lord, the timing of their arrival in Elephant Sun City is too sensitive. I'm afraid they have other plans. Jiang Pingji asked Li Yun. They don't practice martial arts, and the people around them are all showy but not practical. They don't even have the qualities to be spies. Even if there were tens of thousands of them, they wouldn't be able to do anything. Hame, don't worry. Just wait for the show. Although the plan to attack Yang Tao had been postponed, it did not mean that Jiang Pingji had given up. Madame Tao was willing to give her the ready-made reason. How could she refuse? A good show. Li Yun's heart skipped a beat. He did not believe a single word that his lord had said. Is there really no need to discuss this matter with you gentlemen? Jiang Pingji smiled. Needless to say, we won't trouble them with such a small matter. Li Yun was speechless. He felt that these gentlemen were not afraid of trouble, because if they did not interfere, the Lord would always make simple things complicated. In the end, weren't they the ones who cleaned up the mess for their Lord? At this moment, in the live streaming room, Salted Fish and Li Yun were in the same mood. Their hearts ached for the little princesses. Facts proved that Li Yun's intuition was correct. Not even 2 days after the 2 replicas arrived in Xiangyang district, a rumor spread. Not only did it reach Li Yun's ears, it also reached the ears of Qiguan Rang and the others. Feng Jin was the first to fly into a rage. He shouted angrily, Yang Tao and his brother are going too far. Jiang Pingji asked, Have you found out the source of the rumors? There was a murderous look in Wei Xi's eyes. He said, I found out that the other party claimed to be a merchant from Zhangzhou, who came to Wanzhou to do business. This group of merchants brought a rumor that made the people of Wanzhou extremely angry and humiliated. The Duke of Zhengzhou, Yang Tao, searched among the people and found a young man who looked very similar to Lu Shi, the governor of Lu province. He ordered the young man to take off his underwear and outer shirt in front of everyone and stand on the high platform naked. The people could see every inch of the young man's skin. The onlookers were dumbfounded. There were a few internet water armies hidden in the crowd. One person said, I heard that Lu Shi, the Duke of Lanting, is a woman. Her chest isn't so flat. Another person said loudly, Since she's a woman, she naturally doesn't have that big thing between her legs. She also doesn't have the ability to carry on the family line. The onlookers couldn't help but shift their fervent gazes to the area 3 inches below the young man's crotch. It was unexpectedly full of vigor. Another person jeered. If the Duke of Lanting was a man, he would most likely look like this. It looks quite spectacular, but I wonder how big it is. The internet water armies intentionally directed the people's attention in this direction. At that moment, someone who seemed to be an official came forward and made an extremely humiliating suggestion. The people could go forward and pinch the weight of that thing if they donated 3 coins. That was a good thing that even the Duke of Lanting didn't have. The people who loved to jeer were somewhat tempted, but no one dared to be the first to step forward. It was time for someone to step forward. With someone taking the lead, the people who harbored evil intentions also went forward to weigh the weight. Someone could actually do such an absurd and disgusting act. Feng Jin and the others were furious. Even if it was a groundless rumor, they felt extremely humiliated just thinking about the scene. Their blood boiled, and they wanted to kill someone to vent their anger. Qiguan Rang and the others were furious. They couldn't wait to roll up their sleeves. Jiang Pingji, on the other hand, was calm and composed. Why are you so angry? Feng Jin said. The subjects died when the Lord was humiliated. If we couldn't protect the Lord, how can we have the face to stand in this world? Jiang Pingji said. That's just a rumor. It's not true. Yang Tao and the others must have been kicked in the head by thousands of donkeys to do such a thing. They have no enmity with me, and the situation in Nanxing is unstable. Why would they dare to find trouble with me at this juncture? Everyone knew this, but they couldn't suppress the anger in their hearts. No matter who the person who spread the rumor was, the rumor was too humiliating. Lao Siji Lianmeng. Damn. Who came up with such a disgusting evil plan? Just listening to it is incomparably despicable. Shishi Wugua. Oh my god, could this be true? The streamer's psychological quality is really strong. Don't you feel disgusted? Furiously boiled frog. Who came up with this idea? Even the brainless anti-fans on the internet have to admit defeat. It's too vicious. Weici, I said. What do you mean, my lord? Jiang Pingji smiled and said, I was originally curious about what kind of brilliant move Madame Tao and the others had. How could they come up with such a sinister plan? If it was someone with a bad temper, they would have been enraged and retaliated with the same method without a second word. Everyone was speechless. Their lord probably had some deviations in her temper. She made it sound as if she wasn't hot-tempered at all. Jiang Pingji continued, I reckon that similar rumors are spreading in Zhangzhou now. For example, the Duke of Lanting Lu Shi searched the people and found 2 people who looked like Yang Tao and Yin Lin. He used his power to force them to parade naked in the streets for people to see. Madame Tao and the others did this. What are they after? Li Yun felt that he had opened the door to a new world. This operation was too scary. Jiang Pingji said, anyone with a discerning eye can tell at a glance that it's a rumor made up out of nothing. But the rumor is so unbearable that neither Yang Tao nor I can simply laugh it off. Not to mention anything else, the people will spread it by word of mouth. It won't be long before everyone knows about it. Even if we know it's fake, our reputation has already been trampled on. If we don't seek justice from the person in question, it's inevitable that we'll be suspected of being cowards. This era was not like the world of salted fish in the streaming room. In the world of salted fish, it didn't matter if people found out that an otaku released his life essence in front of a goddess's poster. At most, they would reveal a meaningful smile and smile at each other. This era was different. It wasn't a big deal if a high-quality imposter looked like Lu Shi, but someone pointed out that the 2 looked alike. Immediately after, they took off their pants and walked around naked. They even generously asked people to pay to weigh them. This was also a humiliation to the person in question. Mental humiliation. Chapter 1381. Just as Jiang Pingji expected, there was a rumor going around in Zhangzhou. The destructive power of this rumor was too great. Like a virus, it spread quickly and finally alarmed the 2 madams who lived in the backyard. Yang Tao married Yin Lin's sister, and Yin Lin married Yang Tao's favorite sister. The 2 of them were not brothers, but they were closer than brothers. This made the 2 madams of the inner house very close to each other, and they called each other sisters. Yin Lin assisted Yang Tao to participate in the alliance meeting against the 4 factions of Nanman. It was not appropriate for the 2 madams to go to the front line, so they naturally stayed in the safest place to wait for their husband's triumphant return. The madams in the inner house did not have much entertainment. They usually gathered together to drink tea and chat. It was quite a peaceful time. Yin Lin's sister, Yin Shirui, looked like her elder brother. With a little makeup, she was also very elegant. Although Yang Tao's sister was born of a concubine, she was extremely beautiful, and Yang Jian liked her temperament. Although she was born of a concubine, she was treated the same as if she was born of a wife. Yin Lin was not a person who valued family background. He did not neglect his wife because of her family background. The 2 of them also treated each other with respect. The people of Zhangzhou always said that these 2 couples were immortals in heaven. The man was handsome and wise, and the woman was beautiful and virtuous. They were a perfect couple, a perfect couple. However, in recent days, the tone of the conversation had changed, and the rumors and slanders outside had reached the ears of the 2 madams. It started when a servant accidentally knocked over a teacup and almost scalded Yang Rugia. Yin Shirui frowned and asked the servant, "You are usually careful. Why are you so impulsive today?" Although Yin Shirui was young, she was very steady. She was also very capable in managing her subordinates. None of the servants dared to be lazy or neglect her. Her voice was not harsh, but the servant knelt down and begged for mercy. Because Yang Rugia was not hurt, and Yin Shirui was not a cruel person, she wanted to be gentle and punish her lightly. Unexpectedly, the servant did not watch her mouth. She accidentally said something, and attracted the attention of the 2 madams. "What rumors?" Yin Shirui asked. The maid choked and stammered. "Recently, There have been rumors outside that, after sleeping for half a day, the maid still hadn't finished her sentence. However, judging from the maid's expression, this rumor was definitely not something good. Yin Shuxian sent someone to take the maidservant away to reflect on her mistake and forfeit her pay. She turned around and summoned her trusted aide to go out and gather information. It was fine if it was a small matter, but if it was a big matter, she couldn't let her guard down. Have you heard any rumors? Compared to Yin Shuxuan's house, Yang Rigia went out more frequently. She might have heard some rumors. The latter shook his head, and his face was filled with confusion. Not long after, the confidant ran back with a face full of fear. His footsteps hurried and panicked. Madam, there really are scoundrels spreading rumors and maliciously slandering master. Yin Shuyao said, Nanny, don't be in a hurry. Speak slowly. The dowry nanny caught her breath and hurriedly said, Just now, this old servant went to inquire about the news and heard that someone was framing master and Dalong. Yin Shuxua was surprised. Framing my husband and brother? Who would be so bold? The dowry nanny recounted what she had heard. Yin Shuxua and Yang Rigia's pretty faces darkened with anger. The Tao family spread the news that Yang Tao had used an impostor to humiliate Jiang Pingji in Wanzhou. The same thing happened in Zhangzhou. The Duke of Lanting Lu Shi was drunk at a banquet. In his drunken stupor, he mocked men for being gay and even used Yang Tao and Yin Lin as examples. Zhangzhou's Yang Jian was a good man when he was alive. Who would have thought that his only son Yang Tao was an absurd boy with a golden appearance but a rotten heart? Everyone didn't understand. How was Yang Tao absurd? Under further questioning, the Duke of Lanting said, he and Yin Lin claimed to be brothers, but in fact, they were sworn brothers. They married each other's sisters, and they didn't find it disgusting. I heard that both of your wives are outstanding beauties. I wonder how it feels to be treated coldly by your husband, and to be alone in your room? If these words came out of the mouth of an ordinary person, they would have lost their life. But the person who spoke was the Duke of Lanting Lu Shi. Gossip was more real than pearls. After 3 rounds of drinking, the Duke of Lanting was already dead drunk. She spoke arrogantly again, and mocked in front of everyone. Yang Tao and his wife are gay. I wonder if the 2 lonely wives also wear sunglasses to amuse themselves? This family is really funny. Old Yang Jian died with his eyes wide open. What was a mirror sharpening? When 2 men fall in love, they are gay. When 2 women fall in love, they are mirror sharpening. The 2 women are intimately attached to each other and get satisfaction from touching each other's bodies. Because women's body structure is the same, when they fall in love, there is a mirror between them. That's why lesbians are called mirror sharpening. Not only did the Duke of Lanting talk nonsense at the banquet, but when he woke up the next day, he sent people to search everywhere. He found 2 people who looked exactly like Yang Tao and Yin Lin. He said in front of everyone, I've only heard what a gay man is, but I've never seen one before. Why don't you take off your clothes in front of everyone to show me what it means to be gay? It's better to have fun together than to have fun alone. After you've performed in front of me, you'll have to go out and show the people what a gay man is. After saying that, the 2 imitations took off their clothes and touched each other. They were intimate and had sex in front of everyone. They were very happy. Not only that, but they were also drugged and thrown out on the street for people to watch. The 2 of them showed their ugliness. They were like animals who only knew how to copulate. The details were unbearable to watch. When the dowry nanny blurted out the rumors, the 2 young madams almost fainted from anger. I've always heard my husband talk about Lu Shi. He said that he was an upright, open-minded and easygoing person. I didn't expect my husband to be wrong about him. He's a shameless person, who is worse than a pig or a dog. Yin Shuxua caught her breath. Her face was pale, and her lower abdomen was still aching. Seeing this, the dowry nanny hurriedly called for the doctor to prescribe some medicine to stabilize the pregnancy. Yang Rigia was also so angry that her face turned green. However, she was more worried about Yin Shuxua's health. Not only was Yin Shuxua her close friend, but she was also her sister-in-law. Yang Rigia asked, This matter has become so big. Why didn't we hear anything about it before? This matter hasn't been thoroughly investigated, so I didn't dare to bring it up in front of the two madams. Yan Shishua asked with a pale face. Where did this rumor come from? After asking carefully, the two discovered that the source of this rumor was a group of merchants who claimed to be from Wanzhou and came to Zhangzhou to do business. This doesn't seem right. Yan Shishua shook her head. It's a long journey from Wanzhou to Zhangzhou. Could it be that this group of merchants didn't even celebrate the new year and hurriedly brought their goods along? Now that the spring plowing has just passed, there's no business in the two places. Their excuse is very contradictory. Hearing this, Yang Rijia's anger subsided a lot. She said to the manager, why don't we detain these people first and interrogate them to find out who's behind them? I don't believe that their mouths can be tougher than the torture tools in the prison. Chapter 1382. Unlike the reign of terror in Zhangzhou, the situation in Wanzhou was much calmer. Jiang Pingji found a random reason to send the two counterfeits back to their hometown for reincarnation. She ordered her subordinates to reel in the fish. The Tao family has been jumping around for too long. Jiang Pingji held a thin bamboo stick in her mouth and acted like an overbearing president. It's getting cold. It's time to go bankrupt. Yang Si and the others didn't have any objections. Anyway, it wasn't the first time that their lord had gone crazy and was unreliable. On the other hand, Li Yin was honest and picked out the mistakes in her words. My lord, the spring plowing has just ended. The weather will get hotter and hotter. Jiang Pingji secretly rolled her eyes at him and said, Han Mei, there's a generation gap between us. You don't even understand the jokes of young people. Li Yin. He was indeed a few years older than the lord, but it wasn't so exaggerated that there was a generation gap, right? Yang Si smiled and teased. Han Mei indeed doesn't look like a young man. Li Yin was at a loss. Suddenly, he had the illusion that he was out of time. Yang Si said, didn't Layman Zaiki come out with a news story some time ago? In the book, there was a sentence. The weather has turned cold. Let the Wang Corporation go bankrupt. It sounded strange, but after thinking about it carefully, it was very interesting. I didn't expect my lord to also be a fan of Zaiki and like his books. Jiang Pingji said, of course I like Zaiki. I admire him from head to toe. Speaking of which, Wei Si's new book was written by her and him together. However, her only contribution was the nonsensical, it's getting cold, let the Wang group go bankrupt. She thought that it was a string of witty remarks, but Wei Si expressed his disdain. Sai Zixiao, you don't love me anymore. Jiang Pingji squatted beside him and stared at him, hoping that he would add that sentence. Wei Si was at his wit's end. In the end, he suffered a crushing defeat and abandoned his armor. Therefore, this sentence, which was regarded as the first generation of internet slang by later generations, was recorded in the history books. Other than the title of the founder of the realistic school of darkness, Wei Si also gained the title of Pippi Ci. It was only because more and more mischievous and interesting golden sentences appeared in his later works that he could be called an ancient internet expert. Wei Si, I didn't, don't talk nonsense. Madame Tao and others were waiting for the good news happily. Unexpectedly, the good news didn't come. Bad news came one after another. When the aristocratic families annexed the people's land, their hands and feet were usually dirty. Jiang Pingji could investigate them thoroughly. Because of the large number of people in the clan, the quality of the clansmen was not uniform, so it was not rare for the Tao clan's descendants to do something that angered the heavens and the people. No matter which clansman did it, in the end, the entire clan would have to bear the blame. Jiang Pingji did not accuse Madame Tao and the others of the crime of selling illicit salt. Instead, she chose other crimes that had nothing to do with salt affairs. Even so, the result was that the carrot was dragged into the mud. There were more than 30 scattered crimes. As the head of this interest group, Tao enjoyed the most benefits and was found to have committed the most crimes. Jiang Pingji was determined to be ruthless. Naturally, she would not give them time to escape or react. Madame Tao and others kept a lot of private troops, but most of them were ordinary people who had never seen blood. They looked strong, and they could scare the common people. But when they faced the elites under Jiang Pengji's command, they would be sent to their deaths. It didn't take long for them to surround Madame Tao's residence. The clansmen and servants who didn't know what was going on were flustered. The crying of children and women drifted into the high walls of the inner residence and into Madame Han's ears. Madame Han lived in the inner residence and almost never went out. At this time she was also alarmed. She looked a little worried. She asked her personal maid, "What happened outside?" The maid cried. She didn't know whether she was crying for the future of her master or for her own life. "I heard that Lu Shi, the Duke of Lanting, sent troops to confiscate the house. Madam, what should we do now?" Hearing this, Madame Han only felt a buzzing sound in her head, as if something had exploded one after another. The explosion made her deaf. After a while, she regained her senses. What confiscation? The maid couldn't explain clearly, but it was an indisputable fact that the Tao family's residence was surrounded. Madame Han's expression changed. She suddenly got up from her seat and was about to leave when she heard a flurry of footsteps. When she went out, she saw rows of armored soldiers with guns in their hands entering the residence. "How dare you?" Madame Han was furious. She couldn't help but yell at the ruffian soldiers for their actions. "Who allowed you to enter without permission?" The leader of the soldiers asked politely, "May I know who this madam is? Are you a guest or a member of the Tao family?" Madame Han didn't answer. Instead she asked, "Why did you enter without permission?" The leader said, "Madame Tao is plotting a rebellion and framed the governor. I am under orders to arrest the criminal." When Madame Han heard this, she was so angry that she almost fainted. If you want to frame someone, you can always find a pretext. She swallowed down the taste of iron in her throat and scolded. The Tao family has been here for generations, and they have survived through the chaos. Why would they want to rebel at this time? It's obvious that Lu Lanting is coveting other people's private property and is using it as an excuse to take it by force. The world's most vicious bandit is none other than Lu Lanting. All of you are just helping her. The soldiers were polite at first. Although they were confiscating the residence, they didn't take the initiative to force anyone, nor did they smash anything. Compared to the previous examples, they were more refined and courteous. They didn't expect to be scolded so harshly even though they were so polite. It was one thing to scold them, but this crazy woman even scolded the Lord. This was intolerable. There was no need to tolerate it anymore. Arrest them all. Madame Han was just an ordinary woman. How could she compete with an adult man? While the two sides were arguing, Xie voice was heard. "What are you doing? Did you forget the Lord's order not to use force on women?" Everyone stopped fighting and bowed to Xie. Xie knew Madame Han and bowed to her for Han Yu's sake. "Madame Han, please don't get in my way. Madame Tao is guilty, and the evidence is irrefutable." Madame Han was stubborn and wouldn't listen to him. Xie had no choice but to use the Tao family to threaten Madame Han to cooperate with him. Madame Han was so angry that her face turned pale. Xie was also helpless. He didn't care about anyone else's opinion except for Madame Han. If they disobeyed, he would use force and take them away. How could he use force on Madame Han? Even if they divorced, Madame Han was still Mr. Han Yu's legal wife. Xie couldn't be rude to Madame Han for the sake of her reputation. Madame Han was sent to the womenfolk. The sisters-in-law, and sisters-in-law stared at her with burning eyes. They didn't forget that Madame Han got into trouble after she returned home. What surprised Madame Han even more was that as soon as she was locked in, before she could even ask her mother how she was, her mother took the initiative to slap her. The slap caused her right ear to ring and half of her face to swell up at a speed visible to the naked eye. Chapter 1383. Madame Han's eyes were filled with disbelief. The woman in front of him with messy hair and pale cheeks, who seemed to have aged more than 10 years overnight. Was she really his mother? In Madame Han's memory, her mother was dignified and gentle. She was dignified and generous to outsiders and virtuous and steady to her family. Madame Tao was well managed by her. From her father to servants, no one dared not to respect her mother. Her mother also lived a glamorous life. Wherever she went, she was a model praised by others. Whether it was her background, appearance, knowledge, or self-restraint, she was perfect. Her hair was always meticulously combed and decorated with pearls and turtles. Wherever she went, she was the center of attention. Under her mother's guidance and influence, Madame Han unconsciously integrated her mother's style into her bones. Now her mother, who had always been perfect, rushed up and slapped her like a shrew. It was undoubtedly destroying her perfect image in Madame Han's mind. Because she was too shocked, she did not come back to herself. Instead, she raised her hand to cover the swollen half of her face. Mother, mother. Madame Han took 2 steps back and looked at Madame Tao sadly. When did I do such a thing? Madame Han felt that she was wronged. She had always been arrogant, but she looked weak and helpless in front of her mother. Madame Tao slapped her out of anger. She regretted it on impulse. But how could she apologize to her daughter? Besides, she also believed that Madame Han was a traitor. Otherwise, why didn't she divorce at other times, but at this sensitive time? Madame Tao had high cheekbones, a narrow forehead, and not plump skin. She looked a little mean. Usually, she could use makeup to cover her shortcomings, but now she did not. Madame Tao's face was so fierce, and she looked very strange. Hearing Madame Han's wronged explanation, her daughter-in-law spoke before Madame Tao could speak. Are you saying that I wronged you? Madame Tao was very capable in the inner courtyard. She had children born by her legal wife. Although there were children born by concubines, they had to live under her nose. The daughter-in-law who spoke was the youngest son's wife. She had been married for less than half a year. She had thought that she could help her relatives when she married into the family. She did not expect her husband's family to be so disappointing. They were in trouble in just half a year. Not only did he lose his wealth, but he had also become a prisoner. He was indescribably angry. She wouldn't blame Madame Tao for being greedy and occupying the salt business. She could only aim at Madame Han, who stayed at home peacefully. Before Madame Han came, the sisters-in-law pushed all the anger onto Madame Han with just a few words. Otherwise, Madame Tao wouldn't have walked up to her daughter and slapped her in front of everyone. I am innocent, Madame Han said. What does Lu Shi's actions have to do with me? It's not an auspicious separation. One of the sisters-in-law said. Isn't it because you went back to your parents' home that you brought trouble to your parents' home? Madame Han was enraged as well. She blurted out, you're twisting words and forcing logic. Wasn't Lu Shi targeting the Tao residence because of the salt affair? Even though she was a lady from the inner residence, Madame Han wasn't truly ignorant. She knew why Jiang Pingji wanted to deal with the Tao family. Wasn't it because of the salt business that the Tao family and other aristocratic families had seized? However, Jiang Pingji did not dare to tell him the real reason, so she made up a false accusation of conspiracy to rebel. What they didn't know was that Jiang Pingji's accusation of punishing Madame Tao and the others were real. As a lady from the inner residence, Madame Han didn't have the means to know what the other clansmen were doing. As soon as she finished speaking, Madame Tao, who had calmed down a little, gave Madame Han another loud slap. Evil girl! Madame Tao gritted her teeth and said, you're indeed a traitor. The Tao family, and the other aristocratic families, had seized the salt business for too long. It had been so long that they regarded the business as private property. Madame Han's words undoubtedly exposed the ambition and greed of the aristocratic families. How could Madame Tao not be angry? After 2 consecutive slaps, the corner of Madame Han's mouth was bleeding. Both sides of her cheeks were swollen. She looked extremely embarrassed. Mother, why are you like this? What did I do wrong? Madame Han finally couldn't help but cry. The smell of iron in her mouth made her feel nauseous. The people in front of her were her relatives. Her mother was an elder she relied on and respected. She couldn't even recognize her mother's face now. Madame Tao was still angry. She shouted, get lost. The Tao family doesn't have an unfilial daughter like you. The commotion alerted the female soldiers who were guarding them. They came in to take a look, and immediately reported the matter to their superiors. Xieze brought people over. Dozens of female prisoners in the prison were on guard when they saw the opposite sex. In ancient times, once a woman was in prison, She basically couldn't keep her chastity. Many jailers were so evil that they bullied and humiliated the female prisoners. But this time, the jailers were temporarily played by female soldiers, which brought a sense of security to the women. Seeing a bunch of men, their relaxed nerves instantly tensed up. Sieze brought people over. He looked around and found Madame Han in a sorry state. He suddenly felt embarrassed. Someone opened the door. Sieze said to Madame Han, "I didn't think it through just now. I let you stay in the same cell with these unruly people. Please forgive me, Madame Han." He thought that since Madame Han was Madame Tao's daughter, it would be fine if they were thrown together. Who knew that she would be beaten the moment she arrived? Even though Madame Han and Han Yu had divorced, she still couldn't be humiliated by just anyone. Madame Han stared at Sieze. She glanced at the other female prisoners in the prison, and then at her mother who was gritting her teeth. She suddenly raised her hand to cover her face and ran out, sobbing. Sieze looked embarrassed. He asked someone to arrange a clean single cell for Madame Han. Sieze asked Madame Han, "When this is over, will I escort Madame back?" Madame Han said, "Now that you are in such a situation, people will laugh at you when you go back." Sieze said, "Although Madame and you are not fated to be together, you are still the birth mother of the two young masters." After he finished speaking, Madame Han cried even harder. It seemed that she wanted to vent all the grievances she had suffered these days. In the words of the audience in the live broadcast room, Madame Han should have played the trump card badly. Who could she blame? Sieze was worried that Madame Han would take things too hard. He specially arranged for female soldiers to guard her, so that she wouldn't commit suicide. Sieze arrested all the people and confiscated all the properties of the families. When he saw the annual salt accounts of the families, he couldn't help but gasp when he saw the rough figures. His lord was very generous to the soldiers in the military camp. The amount of military expenses allocated every year could be said to be an astronomical figure. This didn't even include the pensions for the deceased soldiers. If the families made a list of military expenses, his lord would definitely be at the top of the list, far ahead of the second place. When he looked at the account book, he finally understood what the Lord often talked about meant by the picture of a broken account. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.